Just after 11:30 a.m. on the 28th of April 2014, 61-year-old Anne Maguire was teaching a Spanish class at Corpus Christi Catholic College in the city of Leeds, a school she devoted the last 40 years of her life to, and from where she was due to retire in a few months. Without warning, she was attacked by one of her pupils, 15-year-old William Cornick, who stabbed her to death in front of a horrified class of children, plunging an 8-inch knife into her neck and back, again and again and again. She managed to run from the classroom pursued by Cornick, and was shielded from further attack by another teacher, but she soon died from her injuries. After the attack, Cornick sat down next to his classmates as if nothing had happened and said, quote, "Good times," before talking about experiencing an adrenaline rush. This was not a random act of violence. Cornick had been planning this murder for months, and he claimed he intended to kill 2 other teachers, including one that was pregnant. What had Anne done to deserve such a horrific death? Absolutely nothing. Cornick was fueled by irrational hatred, which had been building over a number of years, directed towards a woman who was loved by her family, friends, staff and pupils. A few weeks before the attack, he wrote online stating that Anne, quote, "deserves more than death, more than pain, torture, and more than anything we can understand." Cornick was extremely proud of what he'd done and was assessed in court as an extremely dangerous child, with no remorse or empathy for others. Welcome to Evil Among Us. William Cornick was born on the 26th of June 1998 in the city of Leeds in West Yorkshire in the UK. He's the son of Ian Cornick and Michelle Ledbetter. He's described as having grown up in a supportive, middle-class household, and in court, Ian and Michelle were described as, quote, "decent and responsible parents." The pair separated in 2003 when Cornick was around 4 or 5 years old, and from this point to this arrest and imprisonment, he lived with his mother in a property around a mile away from the school. There was apparently no animosity between Ian and Michelle, with Cornick having regular contact with his father. There were no indicators of abuse in the household, and Cornick wasn't known to social services or the police. Cornick joined Corpus Christi Catholic College in Year 7, so when he was 11 years old, after described as a, quote, "delightful pupil who always gave his best and was pleasant, polite, and cooperative with 100% attendance." Cornick was intellectually gifted, did well in his studies. However, whilst his attendance and academics were good, he was somewhat isolated, a bit of a loner, and later described as weird. He was an expert at wearing a mask of sanity to those around him, but internally, it appears that for years before the attack, he'd been having violent fantasies, but also had developed an obsession with knives. However, it was one incident in 2010 which meant the mask slipped and set in motion a sequence of events which would lead to the horrific murder of Anne Maguire just 4 years later. I'll bring everything together at the end of the video, but I think it's important to understand how, at least in my opinion, Cornick progressed from an apparently quiet, affable young man to a remorseless killer in just a few years. As a starting point, it's important to point out that psychopaths tend to gravitate towards certain job roles. You find people with this underlying personality disorder in politics, big business, etc., places where their lack of empathy or remorse means they're willing to step over others to get what they want. Not all psychopaths are dangerous, but those that are, and who are motivated by violence, power and control, also tend to gravitate towards certain types of professions. This includes the armed forces and the police, and I've mentioned a few people on this channel. Could think of several more examples of killers who either joined these organisations or attempted to. The draw here, I think, is the fact that these organisations give them a significant amount of power over other people. In the case of the army, this is the power over your subordinates, if you're an officer, or, in a combat situation, the power to end someone else's life. Also, the access to weapons can be a massive draw to those who have underlying violent fantasies. This is who I think William Cornick was. It's reported that he was, from a young age, obsessed with joining the army. That was his whole focus in life. However, given his statements and actions both on the date of the murder and the months before, I believe that he was drawn to the armed forces not due to some noble ambition to serve his country, but to get access to weapons, indulge his violent fantasies by being able to legally kill people and wield power over others. Cornick was smart. I think he knew that in order to fulfill his goal, he had to appear normal, wear the mask, play the game, until he got what he wanted. However, in 2010, when he was 12 years old, Cornick collapsed on a holiday in Cornwall. He was rushed to hospital and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He briefly began to self-harm after receiving this diagnosis, by cutting himself. Things seemed to settle down, but when he was around 13 years old, Koenig found out that, due to his condition, he'd been able to join the army. His world crumbled. I've spoken to many people who have had their childhood dreams shattered and have gone on to commit crimes, although not in the same league as this. This included people who, like Koenig, found out some underlying medical condition meant they couldn't join the armed forces, or also people who have been in the academy of professional football teams who have been dropped where they didn't make the cut. What's common amongst these people was their descriptions of utter devastation, a feeling that their life was essentially over, but, importantly, rage, pure rage, at themselves, the world, and everyone around them, because their dreams have been devastated. These people all describe suicidal feelings, a feeling of complete disconnect from the world, and sometimes a nihilistic attitude, where they just wanted to destroy everything. I imagine the same was true with Koenig. However, the key difference with him is that he no longer was able to go into the army to indulge his violent, likely
homicidal urges, which, as time progressed, were noticeably increasing in frequency and intensity. Reports about his crime suggest that William Koenig's personality changed after this point. I think this is missing the point to some extent. His personality didn't change, the mask fell away. He no longer felt the need to pretend to be normal, as the goal that he'd needed to do this for had gone. So he had a young man with violent
fantasies, and now add to this, huge amount of rage. He was a ticking time bomb, and unfortunately, Anne Maguire would soon become the focus of his anger. Anne Maguire was born on April 5th, 1953, in the county of Lancashire. At the time of her death, she was 61 years old and spent almost all of her teaching career at Corpus Christi Catholic College in Leeds, having taught thousands of people Spanish during her 40 years there. She was just months away from retirement at the time of her murder. She'd been married to her husband Donald for 37 years, and the pair had 2 adult daughters. She was a much-loved wife, mother, colleague, teacher and friend. And she was described by one pupil as, quote, really caring. She sort of couldn't do enough for people. She was just really lovely to everybody. She was a woman, it appears, who always pushed her pupils to be the best they could be. She and Koenig first met in 2009, when he was 11 years old and she began to teach him Spanish. There are no indicators of any issues in the first year of their interaction. But when Koenig was around 12 or 13, so around 2011, things changed, and this coincided with the time he found out he couldn't join the army. What specifically triggered the spiral of hate towards Anne is unclear. However, I think that now Koenig's childhood dreams have been destroyed, he was angry and saw no point in anything. To him, school had always been a means to an end, a way to achieve his ambition. Now that was taken away from him, he saw no point in his education or any of his classes. I imagine he was resentful from just having to be there, at school, day in, day out. Before finding out he couldn't join the army, I believe that Koenig likely experienced feelings of rage when he was told what to do by others, but he was able to bury this as he needed to appear normal because he knew he had a goal in sight. However, take this away, I think that any instance where someone was telling him what to do angered him. He had to suffer this indignity, and in his mind, for no reason. I think he was looking for a focus for his anger, someone to blame for how he was feeling, and he fixated on Anne Maguire. Why is unclear, but I imagine it started with a trivial comment or admonishment of his behaviour, and he saw red, thinking how dare this woman tell me what to do. From that point, he would seethe and ruminate for the next 3 years, fantasizing about killing Anne before carrying out his horrific plan. How William Koenig's hatred of Anne Maguire escalated between 2011 and around 2013 is unclear, but I imagine it was part of a self-perpetuating cycle. The worse his attitude got, the more reason she had to pull him up on his behaviour, and each time this happened, his hatred of her intensified, and so on and so forth. Koenig was not shy about expressing his hatred of Anne, telling his parents, quote, I can't stand Mrs. Maguire, but they put this down to their teenage son being overdramatic. However, by late 2013, Koenig's descent into madness was evident by his deranged social media posts and comments he made to others. With regards to his relationship with Anne at this time, Koenig was being openly defiant of her. He refused to even sit in front of her and speak to her at a parents' evening during November 2013. He was acting like a petulant little boy. On Christmas Eve into Christmas Day 2013, Koenig was messaging a friend of his where he spoke about, quote, brutally killing Anne Maguire and spending the rest of his life in jail so he didn't have to worry about life or money. He also claimed he was hearing voices. It seems to me that by this point, 4 months before the murder itself, Cornick had already decided he was going to kill Anne and was setting up an insanity defence. The most disturbing information came from a girl, who we'll call Sarah, who apparently entered into a short relationship with Cornick in January 2014. Her statements give an idea of his mindset in the months prior to the attack. Sarah reported that all Cornick wanted to talk about was death and murder, and his hatred of his teachers, with her reporting, quote, "He said they gave him a hard time, and he hated them, but he really hated Mrs. Maguire." Sarah later reported that Cornick would show her pictures of knives on his phone, reflecting his fascination with weapons, as well as, quote, "He sometimes brought knives into school, and he would draw them up and down his arm, breaking the skin and letting it bleed. He asked if he could do it to me, but it scared me. I began to make excuses not to see him at break. When we did meet up, he would talk endlessly about death and Mrs. Maguire, and wanted to commit a murder, and the feeling of power it would give him. He also spoke about killing other teachers and suggested about her going on a killing spree with him." Sarah was disturbed by Cornick's comments and eventually, after only 6 weeks, broke up with him. Beginning in 2014, Cornick's contact with Anne increased because of his poor behaviour. She gave him a detention, which he failed to show up for, which led to a meeting between the pair as well as Cornick's parents. During this meeting, he was rude, defiant, and appeared to agree that he was not being allowed to do whatever he wanted. In mid-February 2014, Cornick had not completed his Spanish homework, and so Anne banned him from going on a class bowling trip. He ignored her and went anyway, and was suspended for a day as a result. William Cornick seemed to have no ability to see his own behaviour as problematic. It was everyone else's fault. These run-ins with Anne in early 2014 sent him deeper and deeper down a path of murderous hatred towards her. On February the 24th, 2014, just weeks before the murder, Cornick posted on social media about his hatred of Anne Maguire, stating that she was, quote, "the one absolute fucking bitch that deserves more than death, more than pain, torture, and more than anything that we can understand." Around this time, he also apparently offered fellow people £10 to kill her. Cornick fantasized about killing Anne for at least a year, and, as already stated, it appears he decided to make this reality in late 2013. According to his latest statements to psychiatrists, he'd be considering different ways to kill her, including shooting her, beating her to death, pushing her out of a window. But he later stated, quote, "I decided on Sunday it was going to be a knife. I thought I was going to go to school and wait for a lesson and do it." This was Sunday the 27th of April 2014, the day before the murder. On Monday the 28th of April 2014, William Cornick put his plan into action. He went to Corpus Christi Catholic College that day, with the specific intention of killing Anne Maguire, and had brought 2 kitchen knives with him. The one he used for the murder had a blade of around 8 inches. Also in his bag was a bottle of Jack Daniels, which he states he was going to drink afterwards to celebrate the murder. Cornick was ecstatic, noticeably buzzing. In the hours before the murder, he told several people about his plan to kill Anne, but also 2 other teachers to the school, Sinead Miley and Andrew Kellett. He told his fellow pupils that he wanted to stab Sinead, specifically because she was pregnant. He would aim for her belly in order to kill her unborn child. Cornick threatened to kill the people he told if they revealed his plan. At around 11:30 a.m, Anne Maguire's Spanish class began in classroom T51. Cornick and several other pupils were sat in a different room, classroom T50, away from the main class so they could have peace and quiet to get on with their work, in preparation for their GCSEs. Cornick then began showing the knife to the other pupils in the room, with him asking several of them if they wanted to touch the blade and see how sharp it was. He said he was going to kill Anne, and how he was going to do it, with him saying he would, quote, "stab her in the neck because it was certain to kill." Again, Cornick threatened those he was talking to, telling one, quote, "if you go and get someone, I'll do it faster, and I'll get you too." William Cornick then stood up from his desk, knife in hand, winked and smiled at one of his classmates, left the room he was in, and walked the short distance down the corridor to the adjacent room. This is a photograph of the room where the murder happened. Cornick entered from the door in the left-hand corner. Anne Maguire was, at this point, walking around the classroom checking on the work of her pupils. She was stood in front of one of these banks of desks, with her back to the door, looking down on the girl's work, when Cornick walked up behind her. Without hesitation, began to stab her again and again and again, aiming at Anne's neck and upper back. He inflicted 7 wounds in a matter of seconds. Anne was 5'3" tall, whilst Cornick was 6'2", and this size difference The fact he attacked her from behind not only shows how much of a coward he is, but also how Anne did not stand a chance. All of the blows were delivered with significant force. One of the stab wounds resulted in the knife passing all the way through Anne's neck, from back to front. Another severed her jugular vein. 2 other blows shattered several ribs and penetrated Anne's right lung. Remember, this horrific assault occurred in front of a room of terrified children. Although fatally wounded, Anne managed to run out of the classroom and down the corridor. Another teacher, Susan Francis, came to her aid, and she later described the horrifying scene. She stated, quote, "I'd gone up to my workroom on the modern foreign languages floor. Suddenly, there was all this screaming, so I flew out into the corridor. I saw all these Year 11s screaming and being horrified. Anne came out. She was holding the back of her neck. I thought there had been a swarm of wasps at first. She kept repeating, 'He stabbed me in the neck.' I put her in the office and shut the door, put my foot against it. We all stood at the other side of the door, motionless. I looked at him and screamed at my colleague Stuart. She kept saying, 'He stabbed me in the neck. He stabbed me in the neck.' I just remember his face, having no emotion on it. None at all. It was like a mask on his face. No emotion. I opened the door to check, and there was a massive knife on the floor outside the room. I could see cuts in her jumper. There was lots of blood coming from her neck. She said to me, 'I can't breathe. I'm dying. He stabbed me in the lung. I can't breathe. I'm dying.' The ambulance people arrived. Their faces looked like they'd walked into some Armageddon. Paramedics attended within minutes, followed by the police. A paramedic who attended the scene stated that Anne's injuries were some of the worst she'd ever seen. Despite valiant attempts to save her, Anne Maguire was declared dead at the scene. Rather than going after the 2 teachers he claimed were on his kill list, William Corning returned to classroom T50, sat down with the stunned pupils, and said, quote, 'Good times,' before telling them how much of an adrenaline rush he was experiencing. This is where he was found by police, who arrested him initially on suspicion of attempted murder. However, at 12:10 p.m, when it was clear that Anne was dead, this was upgraded to murder. The officer who arrested Cornick stated that he was unemotional and simply asked whether anyone had any ice, as he'd hurt his hand attacking Anne. I have no information about what Cornick said or did not say in his police interview. However, ultimately it was obvious who was responsible, and William Cornick was charged with the murder of Anne Maguire and remanded into Wetherby Young Offenders Institute, just outside Leeds, to await his day in court. This murder shocked the country. Unfortunately, there have been instances of teachers being murdered in the course of their duties. Most tragically before this case, Philip Lawrence, a head teacher who was stabbed to death in 1995 outside his school, St George's Roman Catholic School in Maida Vale, when he bravely stepped in to try to protect a pupil who was being attacked by a gang. However, this was the first time, and hopefully the only time, that a teacher was actually killed on school grounds in the UK by a pupil. As if the details of this senseless crime were not bad enough, the true evil of William Cornick, his pride for what he'd done, and his utter remorselessness was yet to come, and will be laid bare at the court proceedings. Due to William Cornick being a child, his identity was withheld from the media, but after he pleaded guilty to Anne Maguire's murder on Monday the 3rd of November 2014 at Leeds Crown Court, the judge, Mr Justice Coulson, stated it was in the public interest for his name and the image to be published. He was sentenced the same day, but it's clear that before this date, he'd already disclosed to the court where his plea was going to be, and in anticipation, he'd been assessed by 2 psychiatrists and a psychologist who prepared reports for the court. The disclosures that Corning made to these professionals are horrifying. Corning states that he fully intended to be caught, hence why he committed the crime at school and in front of multiple witnesses. Corning states that he decided to commit the crime, quote, "After months of thinking life is pretty fucking shit. I couldn't see myself passing college and had no hope of doing anything. I tried to apply for the army, but they said no." In terms of a question about whether he had any regret for what he'd done, Corning responded, quote, "I knew what I was going to do. It's what I did. Said I was going to do other stuff, but I never got the chance. Other murders. It was a triple homicide. What I've done, I couldn't give a shit. I wasn't in shock. I was happy. I had a sense of pride. I still do. I know it's uncivilized, but I know it's incredibly instinctual and human. Partial narrations of life. Killing as a route of survival. It's kill or be killed. I did not have a choice. It was kill her or suicide." With regards to whether he had any guilt for the damage he'd caused the Maguire family, he stated, quote, "I couldn't give a shit. I know the victim's family will be upset, but I don't care. In my eyes, everything I've done is fine and dandy. As a fine indignity,
described Anne Maguire as, quote, barely human. In terms of the conclusions the professionals drew, one of them stated that Cornick had, quote, a gross lack of empathy for his victim and a degree of callousness rarely seen in clinical practice. It was also concluded that he had a psychopathic personality, posing extremely high level of risk to others. It could not be ruled out that he would kill again. There was no evidence to indicate his claims about hearing voices were true. Judge Coulson recounted Cornick's sickening comments in open court, as well as the assessments, which all drew the same conclusion, that he was an extremely dangerous young man, devoid of empathy, guilt and compassion. This all occurred whilst Cornick, now aged 16 years old, sat motionless in the dock. Judge Coulson described the attack as, quote, brutal and cowardly, and stated, your pride in what you did and your complete lack of remorse are greatly grotesque. He then sentenced him. For the murder of Anne Maguire, William Cornick was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the minimum term for 20 years in prison before he could apply for parole. However, the judge told him that due to the gravity of his crimes and the danger he posed, he may never be released. It's clear that after his sentence, Cornick's bravado quickly evaporated. In January 2015, he appealed his sentence, with his barrister arguing the minimum tariff was far too severe and didn't reflect his youth, guilty plea, and lack of previous convictions. The appeal was probably rejected. In 2017, it was reported, by way of Cornick's father, that he was now sorry for what he'd done. However, it appears that what prompted these statements of remorse were the fact that he'd now moved to big boy prison and was, quote, scared and isolated in this environment. I believe I'm quite good at saying what people are thinking on this channel, and all I can say is good. I hope he feels isolated and scared for the rest of his miserable life. I think he's never released. That is the punishment he should receive for an act of utter cowardice, brutality, taking away a woman who devotes her whole life to educating others. Fuck you, William Cornick. As testament to the woman that Anne Maguire was, 1,500 people, including family, friends, pupils, former pupils, colleagues and former colleagues, attended a memorial service to her at Leeds Town Hall on the 29th of September 2014. So many people attended that 250 of them had to stand outside whilst the service was televised. Many people gave movie eulogies about Anne. She was a woman who, as a teacher, went above and beyond her job description. However, she never lost sight of her family. She was described as the clean devotion to her two daughters. She would stay out late until the night, sewing dance costumes for them, and would bake cakes with them in the small hours if they couldn't sleep. When they both went off to ballet school in London, she wrote daily letters and recorded tapes of herself reading Jane Austen for them to listen to if they got homesick. She went up and down the M1 to visit them, often with a pile of books in the car to mark before Monday morning. I think the most heartbreaking statement came from Anne's devoted husband Donald, who she'd spent 37 happy years with. He was no doubt looking forward to spending his twilight years with Anne after she retired at the end of the school year. Now he was having to bury his wife and face the rest of his life without her. This was read out at the sentencing hearing and states, quote, as a young girl, Anne visited the sick and helped the elderly in her local community. The hundreds or maybe thousands of wonderful tributes paid over the months are testament to the person Anne Maguire. The guidance for preparing a victim impact statement advises to avoid turning the victim of the crime into a kind of saint. Such advice does not apply in this case. Anne was a beautiful, vivacious, caring, generous human being. She was unique amongst peers and her family. We met and fell in love in the spring of 1972. We were a very private couple, constantly dreaming of a rural backwater, but the world seemed to shatter our hopes at regular intervals. Now, all dreams have gone forever. I'm still a dad, but I cannot help my children understand. Can't help them to come to terms. Can't help lessen the pain. Mummy would have been much better. I can no longer be a dad. I fail every day. I need Anne. Parts of our lives have been brutally taken. The centre of our lives is missing. Our very being has been diminished. Facing the world is very difficult. Facing oneself is very difficult. Anne Maguire was a selfless woman who devoted her whole life to the betterment of others. She deserved to spend many years enjoying her retirement, just reward for a lifetime of service to others. However, her life was cut short by a pathetic coward who, unlike her, contributed nothing to this world. I hope Anne is at peace and that she is reunited with her family again. I've already given broad strokes of my opinion on the profile of William Cornick during the video in order to better understand his offending. However, I want to expand upon this to give a fuller idea of why he did what he did, but also to highlight how dangerous he really is.
So it appears that Cornick having a psychopathic personality was confirmed by psychiatrists and psychologists who assessed him. Therefore, he's an individual without remorse, empathy or guilt. None of the professionals in this case identified that Cornick had suffered any abuse as a child and were at a loss to explain how he ended up developing into such a dangerous young man. Potentially, there was unreported abuse, or maybe he was born with a neurological issue, which affects his brain development. We'll likely never know. However, we do know he was an individual who was solely interested in himself and what he wanted, and that was, from a young age, to join the army. As I stated earlier, given his state was before the crime, and the crime itself, I've listed out the main reason for wanting to pursue this profession was power. Power over other people, in terms of being able to order them to do whatever he wanted, including to potentially give up their lives, but also importantly, the power to end the lives of others. It's not reported anywhere, but I find it unlikely that Cornick was interested in being a regular squaddie. No doubt he wanted to be an officer, and for this, you need to have a good education, a degree. So, in order to achieve this aim, he needed to do well in school, and he applied himself. It was a necessary evil. He has to interact with other pupils and staff, suffer being told what to do. When he was diagnosed with diabetes, his childhood dream was at an end. However, whilst this would inevitably have been devastating, it meant so much more to him than others. Essentially, his dreams of wielding total control over other people and having an outlet for his homicidal urges crumbled around him. No doubt Cornick would have felt extreme rage. His life was now pointless, and I believe his mindset became entirely fatalistic. He wanted to see the world, but he felt a let him down burn. But he had to come to school, but what was the point? His dream was over. However, Anne Maguire was not ready to give up on him. She had likely had many children who were uncertain about their future, and whom she had helped achieve their potential. And likely, in all of her years of teaching, she had had people in similar positions to Cornick, who she had motivated to change their focus. But William Cornick had no interest in this. He wanted what he wanted. He would accept no substitutes. Now, there was no point suffering these people, this environment, especially not anyone telling him what to do. How dare they? Anne became a focus of his anger. There was anger at her for daring to tell him what to do, but also anger that he would not be able to march across the battlefield, killing people in far distant lands. However, the homicidal urges, which he likely hoped to chow in the army, continued, and soon became laser focused on Anne. As she tried to hold him to account, the more he rebelled and the more he pushed back, his anger became worse and worse. I think he was feeling powerless, and Anne telling him what to do reminds him of this. No doubt he had repeated fantasies about killing her, wielding the power he'd always wanted, but had been taken away from him. Evidence that this was one of his primary motivators was shown by what he told his girlfriend, where he said he wanted to kill Anne for, quote, the feeling of power it would give him. Anne was beneath him. How dare she tell him, a superior being, what he could and could not do? She was subhuman. In his sick and twisted mind, this murder eliminated a woman who dared to tell him what to do, but also showed everyone how powerful he was. His choice of location was not arbitrary. He wanted a captive audience. He wanted people to see up close what happened to those who defied him. I imagine he felt that killing Anne in their own classroom was some sort of irony, turning the place she loved into the place where her life would end. He knew he'd be caught. That was the point. He then wanted his day in court. He wanted the audience, sitting in the dock, all attention on him, the teenage killer, the bad man. His life was essentially pointless. He couldn't have what he wanted, so fuck it. Might as well burn it all to the ground. So on the day he chose to murder Anne Maguire, he arrived at school. This sick excuse for a human being was buzzing. He couldn't help but tell people his plans, showing them the weapon he was going to use to end her life. This is all part of the performance. What was the point of doing any of this if people didn't know, if he had no one to brag to? He then walked up behind Anne, and like a coward, stabbed her to death. Both before and after the attack, Cornick made the claim that he intended to kill 2 other people. I've no doubt he fantasized about killing other people, probably including these 2 teachers, but likely anyone who annoyed him. However, I don't think he really thought further than killing Anne. After he killed her, he made no effort to seek out more targets, and simply went and sat down. Also, his ridiculous bollocks about the fact that he either had to kill Anne, or commit suicide. I don't believe there was any intention to kill himself. He's a narcissist. I doubt that he would ever actually take his own life, robbing the world of someone as great as him. In the moments before his arrest, he couldn't help but brag about what he'd done. When the police took him away, this was the start of the second act, the court case. I'm sort of surprised he pleaded guilty. Often monsters like him want to use the trial as a way to get more attention. However, I think he weighed up the odds. He knew he was going to prison. By pleading guilty, he'd get some credit and reduce the time he would spend inside. Also, if he made the claim before about hearing voices, Larry thought this was something else he could play on to try and get a reduced sentence. He wanted all of the credit, but none of the punishment. Regardless, he didn't really need the trial. He had psychiatrists and psychologists whose whole attention was on him, and he used this to spew his vitriol. I think he was hoping to shock them with his statements and portray himself as a heartless but powerful monster. I imagine he walked to these interviews giddy, but he had a captive audience to relive his accomplishments. However, then Cornick was sentenced. I think it was at this point he realised how screwed he actually was. This is a terrible case, but you look for a silver lining where you can. I'd like to imagine Cornick lying in his bunk in prison, with this realisation creeping up on him, the bravado falling away, and the sad little boy coming to the surface. Also, when he ended up in adult prison and realised he was with the big boys, he was frightened. He made one last roll of the dice, making statements he was now regretting his actions. No doubt this was him trying to get some leniency, hoping someone would go, "Oh look, Cornick is sorry, poor little lamb, let him out." However, luckily, he remains in prison where he belongs and will serve at least another 10 years before he can apply for parole. I'm in full agreement that Cornick has lied his kill again. If he's ever released, he'd have been out of society for decades. He'll likely struggle, and because of this and his history, he'll likely be limited to opportunities for work, etc. Have to adjust to a standard of living, they will likely fear this beneath him. In this mindset, I can imagine him again deciding to watch the world burn, and focusing all of his anger on someone who likely will have no idea the depth of his murderous rage against them. This could be literally anyone he comes across who annoys him. Also, can you imagine what he'd be like in a relationship if his partner did not do what he said? This is the danger of William Cornick, and the reason why I, for one, am glad that he is now safely under lock and key, and hopefully he spends many, many, many more years, and not just 10 in prison. On a sweltering July afternoon in 2019, the facade of suburban bliss was shattered in a way that would haunt the community for years to come. At the center of this tragedy were the Hendersons. Thaddeus, a 45-year-old investment banker with a reputation for his work ethic and community involvement, and his wife Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor known for her vibrant personality and infectious laugh. They had been fixtures in the community for over a decade, their seemingly perfect marriage the envy of many. Next door lived the Coopers, Elaine, a widow, and her 19-year-old son Liam, a college sophomore home for the summer. The Coopers had moved in 5 years ago, and while they kept to themselves more than most, they were generally well liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted that these ordinary lives would collide in such a catastrophic way. Thaddeus Henderson had always been driven by ambition. Born to working-class parents in rural Iowa, he had clawed his way up the social ladder through sheer determination and an almost obsessive work ethic. By his early 30s, he had established himself as a rising star at a financial company. His colleagues admired his sharp analytical mind, and his clients appreciated his no-nonsense approach to wealth management. Margot Sinclair, as she was known before her marriage, had a different trajectory. The daughter of a college professor and an artist, she grew up in a household that valued creativity and self-expression. She studied modern dance at the university, dreaming of a career on stage. However, a knee injury in her senior year derailed those plans, leading her to pivot towards yoga and wellness coaching. Their paths crossed at a charity gala in 2003. Thaddeus, already successful but lacking in social graces, was immediately drawn to Margot's vivacity and charm. For Margot, Thaddeus represented stability and the promise of a comfortable life that would allow her to pursue her passions without financial worry. They married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. The early years of their marriage were happy ones. Thaddeus's career continued to flourish, and he took pride in providing Margot with the life he felt she deserved. Margot, for her part, threw herself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and attending social events that were crucial for Thaddeus's networking. She also began teaching yoga part-time at an upscale studio, finding fulfillment in helping others achieve balance and inner peace. But as the years wore on, cracks began to appear in their carefully constructed life. Thaddeus's work hours grew longer, his ambition pushing him to chase ever bigger deals and clients. He was rarely home before 9 p.m., and even when he was physically present, his mind was often elsewhere, constantly checking his phone for emails or market updates. Margot, approaching her 40s, found herself increasingly restless. The yoga classes and charity committees that once filled her days now felt hollow. She began to question the choices that had led her to this point, wondering if she had traded her dreams for a gilded cage. The couple's failure to conceive, despite years of trying, added another layer of strain to their relationship. By the summer of 2019, the Hendersons' marriage was a carefully maintained facade. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the golden couple. Thaddeus continued to excel at work, recently closing a deal that put him in line for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes were more popular than ever, her students drawn to her warmth and apparent serenity. But behind closed doors, they were virtual strangers. Conversations, when they happened, were perfunctory and centered around schedules and social obligations. Physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, each touch laden with unspoken resentments and unfulfilled expectations. Neither Thaddeus nor Margot was willing to admit, even to themselves, how far they had drifted apart. It was easier to maintain the illusion, to go through the motions of a happy marriage, than to confront the emptiness that had grown between them. Little did they know that this unacknowledged chasm in their relationship was about to become the catalyst for a tragedy that would shatter not just their lives, but the entire community of Riverside. The Coopers had moved into the house next door to the Hendersons in 2014, following the death of Elaine Cooper's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper. A respected oncologist, Reginald had succumbed to the very disease he had spent his life fighting, leaving Elaine to raise their son Liam alone. Elaine, a soft-spoken librarian, had initially struggled to adjust to life in the new community. The move from their modest home in St. Paul had been necessary to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their old house, but the affluent suburb felt alien to her. She found solace in her books and in tending to the garden that soon became the envy of the neighborhood. Liam Cooper was 14 when they moved in, a lanky, introverted teenager more comfortable with computers than with people. The transition to a new school had been difficult, and he often found himself the target of bullies who mocked his second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor. It was during this time that Thaddeus Henderson had taken Liam under his wing, offering him a job mowing lawns and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Liam had blossomed. The awkward teen grew into a handsome young man, his natural intelligence finally finding an outlet in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his growing confidence, Liam remained devoted to his mother. He worried about her isolation and loneliness, and made a point of coming home most weekends, even when his friends were planning parties or road trips. It was on one of these weekend visits in early June that he first encountered Margot Henderson in a new light. Elaine had always been grateful for the Hendersons' kindness, particularly Margot's efforts to include her in neighborhood activities. She often spoke of Margot's generosity, unaware of the complex emotions brewing beneath the surface of her son's polite nods. The spark that ignited the affair between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened on a balmy evening in early June, during one of the Hendersons' legendary summer barbecues. Thaddeus, as usual, was holding court near the grill, regaling his colleagues with tales of his latest financial coup. Margot, feeling particularly isolated amidst the crowd, had retreated to the relative quiet of the pool house to replenish the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly dragged to the party by his mother, chose that moment to seek refuge from the noise and forced socializing. He entered the pool house not realizing it was occupied and found Margot struggling with a large bag of ice. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. He moved to help her with the ice, their hands brushing. They stood there, momentarily frozen, the cold of the ice contrasting sharply with the heat building between them. It was Margot who broke the silence, her voice husky as she thanked him. Liam, usually so articulate, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter set the stage for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, Margot and Liam found themselves manufacturing reasons to be in each other's company. It started innocently enough, Margot asking Liam for help with her laptop, Liam offering to help in her garden. Each interaction was charged with an undercurrent of attraction that they both tried to ignore. Their first kiss happened almost a month after the barbecue. Liam had been helping Margot set up for one of her yoga classes in the park. As they finished, a sudden summer storm broke out. They ran for shelter under a nearby gazebo, laughing and breathless. As the rain poured down around them, Margot looked at Liam and felt a surge of desire she hadn't experienced in years. Before she could think better of it, she leaned in and kissed him. From that point, their affair escalated quickly. They were reckless, driven by a combination of Liam's youthful passion and Margot's desperation to feel alive again. They met in secluded spots around town, in the back row of the local cinema, in a hidden corner of the public library, and, most dangerously, in the Henderson home when Thaddeus was at work. Each encounter left them craving more, the gulf in their ages forgotten in the heat of their stolen moments. Margot felt rejuvenated, rediscovering parts of herself she thought long lost. Liam, for his part, was intoxicated by Margot's experience and the taboo nature of their relationship. But as the summer wore on, the strain of maintaining their secret began to show. Close calls became more frequent, a neighbor almost catching them in an embrace, a suspicious glance from Elaine when Margot's name came up too often in conversation. The guilt, too, started to weigh on them both. Liam struggled with the knowledge that he was betraying Thaddeus, a man who had been nothing but kind to him. Margot found herself lying more and more to her husband, each deception another crack in the foundation of her marriage. Yet despite the risks and the guilt, neither seemed able to end the affair. They were caught in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the devastating consequences that loomed on the horizon. July 15, 2019, dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. It was a Monday, and Riverside stirred to life as its residents prepared for another week of work and routine. For Thaddeus Henderson, it began like any other day. He rose early, donned one of his impeccably tailored suits, and left for the office before Margot had even stirred from sleep. Margot woke later, her mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Thaddeus had informed her the night before that he would be working late, a crucial client dinner that could seal his partnership deal. For Margot, this meant an opportunity. She sent a text to Liam, her heart racing as she suggested he come over in the afternoon. Liam, who had been agonizing over the affair for days, saw the message as a chance to end things face to face. He replied with a simple, "Okay," resolving to break it off before the situation spiraled further out of control. The day passed slowly for both of them. Margot went through the motions of her morning yoga class, her usual serenity replaced by a nervous energy that her students couldn't help but notice. Liam, at his summer job, found it hard to focus on the lines of code on his screen, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Margot and the conversation to come. At 2:30 p.m., Liam made his way next door, glancing furtively around to ensure none of the neighbors were watching. Margot ushered him in quickly, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. It was Liam who broke the silence, starting to say that they needed to talk. But Margot, misreading his intention and driven by a desperate need to feel desired, cut him off with a passionate kiss. Despite his reservations, Liam found himself responding, his resolve weakening in the face of Margot's intensity. What happened next was a blur of discarded clothes and tangled limbs. As they made their way to the master bedroom, all thoughts of ending the affair were temporarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddeus Henderson sat in his office frowning at his computer screen. The numbers for the client presentation weren't adding up, and he knew he'd have to redo a significant portion of his work. Frustration mounting, he made a snap decision. He would go home, regroup, and return to the office later to finish up before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddeus's car pulled into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's beat-up Honda parked a little way down the street, but thought nothing of it. Probably helping Elaine with some errand, he mused as he unlocked the front door. The house was quiet as Thaddeus entered, but something felt off. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, unusual for Margot at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Frowning, he climbed the stairs, the noise growing louder as he approached the master bedroom. What Thaddeus saw when he opened the door would be forever seared into his memory. His wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old guy he had mentored and trusted. Then, with a roar of rage and pain, Thaddeus lunged forward, his hands, so used to manipulating numbers and shaking on business deals, now curled into fists as he grabbed Liam, yanking him off the bed. Margot screamed, scrambling to cover herself and separate the two men, but her efforts were in vain. Thaddeus's first punch caught Liam squarely in the jaw, sending the younger man stumbling backward. For Liam, driven by adrenaline and fear, fought back. The two men grappled, crashing into the dresser, sending framed photos and trinkets scattering across the floor. In the chaos, no one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that fell from the dresser's top. No one saw it until Thaddeus, in a fit of blind rage, grabbed it and brought it down on Liam's head with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Liam crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his motionless form. Margot's scream pierced the air as the full horror of what had just transpired hit them all. In that moment, as storm clouds gathered outside and sirens wailed in the distance, the lives of everyone involved changed irrevocably. The idyllic facade of Riverside had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of the community. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, curiosity mingling with apprehension, as squad cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the Henderson residence. The first officers on the scene were met with a tableau of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they found a shell-shocked Thaddeus Henderson, his hands covered in blood, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot barely clothed and hysterical. The room bore all the hallmarks of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, shattered glass, and smears of blood on the hardwood floor. Detective Ava Rossi, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, took charge of the scene. Her first priority was securing medical attention for Liam Cooper. As paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize him, Rossi began the delicate process of piecing together the events that had led to this tragedy. Thaddeus, still in a state of shock, was taken into custody without resistance. Margot was separately questioned. Their stories, fragmented and emotional, painted a picture of a long simmering marital discord that had exploded into violence. As word spread through the neighborhood, a crowd began to gather at the police cordon. Among them was Elaine Cooper, who collapsed in grief when informed of her son's critical condition. She was quickly whisked away to the hospital, where Liam was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. The investigation moved quickly. Forensics teams combed through the Henderson home, collecting evidence and taking photographs. The crystal bookend, now a potential murder weapon, was carefully bagged and tagged. Neighbors were interviewed, their statements adding context to the relationships between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor recalled hearing raised voices from the Henderson house earlier that afternoon, but had dismissed it as a television playing too loudly. Another mentioned seeing Liam enter the Henderson home around 2:30 p.m., noting it because he thought it odd given Thaddeus's usual work schedule. As night fell, the gravity of the situation became clear. Liam Cooper was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m., never having regained consciousness. The charge against Thaddeus Henderson was elevated from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Margot, racked with guilt and facing intense scrutiny, admitted to the affair with Liam. Her statement, given through tears at the police station, provided a timeline of their relationship and the events leading up to that fateful afternoon. Thaddeus, advised by his hastily retained attorney, remained silent, but his colleagues at the company painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, working long hours in pursuit of a partnership that had seemed within reach. None, however, had suspected the depth of his marital problems or the capacity for violence that had been unleashed. The case against Thaddeus Henderson was building, but Rossi knew that in the court of public opinion, there would be no clear villains or heroes in this story, only victims, each in their own way, of the secrets and lies that had finally come to light in the most devastating manner possible. For no one has ever expected the plot twist that's about to come, and twist that will shock everyone, including the Hendersons. The Henderson trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the events that had shaken Riverside to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Thaddeus Henderson as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally murdered a young man in the prime of his life. Talbot's words were measured but impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Henderson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney countered with a narrative of his own. He portrayed Thaddeus as a devoted husband and pillar of the community, pushed to the brink by a betrayal of the deepest kind. Sterling suggested that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to cause Liam's fatal injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, and character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of both Thaddeus and Liam. But it was Margot Henderson's testimony that captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days on the stand, she laid bare the disintegration of her marriage and the evolution of her relationship with Liam. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Thaddeus had walked in on them and the horror of watching the confrontation unfold. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had driven her husband to temporary insanity. But Margot held firm, accepting her part in the tragedy while insisting that nothing justified Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's testimony was brief but powerful. Still grief-stricken, she spoke of her son's kindness and his dreams for the future, all cut short in an act of violence. Her quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Thaddeus Henderson. Against his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand. His testimony was a study in contrasts, moments of apparent remorse interspersed with flashes of the anger that had led to Liam's death. He spoke of the pressure he'd been under at work, the growing distance in his marriage, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity. When describing the fight with Liam, Thaddeus claimed he had never intended to cause serious harm, that he had simply lost control. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses from the field of psychology were called to provide insight into the minds of those involved in the tragic events. Dr. Cho explained that Thaddeus's actions could be understood through the lens of what psychologists call intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by episodes of violent, aggressive behavior disproportionate to the situation. She pointed to Thaddeus's high-stress job, his unexpressed marital dissatisfaction, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing factors to his violent outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho conceded that while these factors could explain Thaddeus's behavior, they did not excuse it. She emphasized that many individuals face similar stressors without resorting to violence. The defense called a specialist in marriage and family therapy to testify about the psychological impact of infidelity. Friedman described the profound sense of betrayal and loss of identity that a person may experience upon discovering a spouse's affair. He likened it to a form of psychological trauma, capable of triggering extreme emotional responses. The psychological analyses presented during the trial offered a complex picture of human behavior and motivation. They highlighted how a combination of personal history, societal expectations, and immediate circumstances can collide to create a perfect storm of tragedy. After 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Thaddeus Henderson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. After a short recess to consider all factors, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver her sentence. Citing the violent nature of the crime balanced against Thaddeus's lack of prior criminal history and the unique circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddeus was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the crowd's reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. But all agreed on one thing: the events that had unfolded in Riverside would leave an indelible mark on the community for years to come. Sabrina Brooks was known for her beauty and charm, qualities that had once captivated her husband, Robert. Their marriage seemed like a fairy tale, a perfect match that everyone admired. But the arrival of Robert's elderly mother, Miriam, into their home set off a chain of events that would end in unspeakable horror. Miriam was a frail but spirited woman, loved by her son and cherished by those who knew her. When Robert decided to bring her to live with them, he believed it was the right thing to do, a way to care for her in her twilight years. Sabrina, however, saw it differently. She viewed Miriam as an intruder, a threat to her domestic bliss. As tensions escalated, Sabrina's resentment turned to desperation. In a moment of madness, she concocted a deadly plan to rid herself of the woman she blamed for her misery. What followed was a chilling tale of premeditated murder, a crime that would leave an indelible mark on all who were touched by it. Sabrina and Robert's relationship began like a whirlwind romance. They met at a friend's wedding, where Robert, a successful architect, was immediately smitten by Sabrina's grace and vivacity. She worked as a freelance product photographer, and her creative spirit matched well with Robert's structured approach to life. After a brief courtship, they married and settled into a beautiful home on the outskirts of town. Miriam Brooks had lived a full life. Widowed for nearly a decade, she maintained her independence in a modest house in town. Her health had begun to decline, and Robert, ever the dutiful son, felt it was his responsibility to care for her. Miriam had always been a nurturing presence in Robert's life, and he couldn't bear the thought of her being alone. Initially, Sabrina and Miriam got along well enough. Miriam was polite and grateful, and Sabrina, though slightly apprehensive, made an effort to welcome her mother-in-law. But as weeks turned into months, the strain of their living arrangement began to show. Miriam's constant presence disrupted the couple's privacy and routine, and Sabrina felt increasingly sidelined in her own home. Robert, caught between his wife and his mother, tried to balance their needs. He was patient and kind, hoping that time would ease the tension. But Sabrina's discontent only grew. She confided in her friends about the stress she was under, seeking advice on how to cope. Some suggested patience, while others hinted that Robert's loyalty to his mother might always overshadow his marriage. The situation worsened as Miriam's health declined further. She required more care and attention, which fell primarily on Sabrina during the day while Robert was at work. The constant demands wore on her, leading to frequent arguments with Robert. He, in turn, became defensive and frustrated, unable to understand why Sabrina couldn't be more accommodating. Sabrina's resentment festered, turning into a simmering rage. She felt trapped, her life overshadowed by an elderly woman who seemed to sap all the joy from her marriage. As her desperation grew, Sabrina's thoughts took a darker turn. She began to entertain the idea of a life without Miriam, envisioning the return of her once idyllic marriage. It was in these moments of bitterness and despair that the seeds of her deadly plan were sown. Robert's decision to bring Miriam into their home was not made lightly. He had seen his mother's health decline and knew she needed more support than he could provide from a distance. After long discussions with Sabrina, he convinced her that it was the best solution. Reluctantly, Sabrina agreed, though she harbored reservations about the impact on their marriage. The day Miriam moved in, Robert and Sabrina prepared a guest room with care. Robert was excited to have his mother close, and Sabrina, though uneasy, wanted to support her husband's decision. Miriam arrived with a few suitcases and a warm smile, grateful for her son's hospitality. In the beginning, the arrangement seemed manageable. Miriam was polite and tried not to impose. She kept to her room most of the time, reading or knitting, and joined the couple for meals and occasional outings. Robert was relieved to see his mother settled and safe, but Sabrina began to feel the strain almost immediately. Miriam's presence altered the dynamics of the household. Dinner conversations that once flowed easily between Sabrina and Robert now included Miriam's comments and stories. Robert's attention was divided, and Sabrina found herself missing the intimacy they once shared. The subtle shifts in their relationship gnawed at her, creating an undercurrent of resentment. The first major conflict arose over household routines. Miriam, accustomed to her way of doing things, often interfered with Sabrina's established methods. She would rearrange the kitchen, critique Sabrina's cooking, or offer unsolicited advice on housekeeping. Sabrina, who prided herself on running an efficient home, felt undermined and disrespected. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Miriam had criticized Sabrina's choice of dessert, the couple had a heated argument. "Robert, exhausted from work and the constant tension, defended his mother, insisting that Sabrina was overreacting. Sabrina, feeling betrayed and isolated, lashed out, accusing Robert of always taking his mother's side. The arguments became more frequent. Robert, torn between his love for his wife and his duty to his mother, struggled to keep the peace. He tried to mediate, suggesting compromises and asking both women to be more understanding. But the underlying issues remained unresolved, and the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly toxic. Sabrina's resentment deepened as she felt increasingly trapped in a situation she had never wanted. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor, and she confided in a few about the constant stress she was under. Some offered sympathy, others advised her to stand her ground, but none could offer a solution that seemed viable. As the days turned into weeks, the initial harmony gave way to a persistent tension that permeated every aspect of their lives. The once warm and inviting home became a battleground of unspoken grievances and simmering anger. Sabrina's frustration reached a boiling point, and she began to fantasize about drastic measures to reclaim her life. Little did she know, those dark thoughts would soon manifest into a chilling reality. The tension in the Brooks household continued to rise, seeping into every corner of their lives. Miriam, oblivious to the depth of Sabrina's resentment, tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She believed that with time things would improve, but Sabrina's patience was wearing thin, and her anger became harder to conceal. One morning, Sabrina discovered that Miriam had reorganized the pantry. What seemed like a minor inconvenience to Robert felt like a personal affront to Sabrina. She stormed into the living room where Miriam was sitting, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "You can't just come in here and change everything. This is my house." Miriam looked up, startled. "I was only trying to help, dear. I didn't mean to upset you. It's not help when it's done without asking. You're just making things harder." Robert walked in just as Sabrina's voice rose, and he quickly stepped between them. "Sabrina, please calm down. She's just trying to help." Sabrina shot him a look of pure frustration. "You always take her side, Robert. I'm the one who has to deal with this every day." Robert sighed, rubbing his temples. "This isn't about sides. We're a family. We need to work together." Despite Robert's attempts to mediate, the rift between Sabrina and Miriam grew wider. Sabrina started avoiding Miriam as much as possible, retreating to her studio to work on her graphic design projects. She found solace in her work, a temporary escape from the constant strain at home. But the escape was fleeting. Every time she left her studio, she was reminded of Miriam's presence. The small irritations accumulated, each one adding to the weight of her resentment. She began to dread coming home, the once safe haven now a source of continuous stress. Friends noticed the change in Sabrina. She became more withdrawn, her usual vibrant personality overshadowed by a constant undercurrent of tension. During a coffee outing with her close friend Julia, Sabrina finally opened up about the depth of her frustration. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Julia. She's everywhere all the time. It's like I'm living with a stranger in my own home." Julia listened sympathetically. "Have you talked to Robert about how you feel?" Sabrina let out a bitter laugh. "Talked? All we do is argue about her. He doesn't see how much it's affecting me. He just wants to keep the peace." Julia reached out and squeezed Sabrina's hand. "Maybe you need to take some time for yourself. Get away for a bit. Clear your head." Sabrina nodded, but deep down she knew that a temporary escape wouldn't solve her problems. The constant presence of Miriam in her home felt like a prison sentence, one she couldn't escape from. Her thoughts grew darker, and she began to entertain ideas she had once considered unthinkable. One night, as Sabrina lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a thought crossed her mind that made her shudder. What if Miriam wasn't here anymore? The idea lingered, gaining strength with each passing day. It was a forbidden thought, one that brought a sense of both horror and twisted relief. As the days turned into weeks, the seeds of a plan began to take root in Sabrina's mind. She started researching methods to make someone ill, initially out of morbid curiosity. But the more she read, the more the idea of poisoning Miriam seemed like a viable solution to her predicament. It would be quick, discreet, and if done correctly, could appear as a natural death. Sabrina's desperation clouded her judgment. She convinced herself that this was the only way to regain control of her life and salvage her marriage. The dark thoughts that had once seemed so alien now felt like a lifeline. Little did she know this decision would lead her down a path of no return, with consequences far beyond her darkest imaginings. Sabrina's desperation reached its peak as she found herself more isolated and overwhelmed by the day. The once loving and harmonious relationship with Robert now felt like a distant memory, replaced by constant arguments and mutual resentment. She began to see Miriam not as an innocent elderly woman, but as the embodiment of all her marital problems. Confiding in friends became a regular outlet for Sabrina's frustration. During a particularly emotional conversation with her friend Lisa, Sabrina's true feelings came to the surface. "I can't do this anymore, Lisa. Every day is a battle. I feel like I'm losing myself." Lisa looked concerned. "You need to find a way to cope, Sabrina. Maybe you should see a therapist or take some time away." Sabrina shook her head. "Therapy won't change anything. The problem is Miriam. As long as she's here, nothing will get better." Lisa hesitated, then spoke softly. "Have you thought about asking her to move out? Maybe she could go to a care facility where she'd get the help she needs." Sabrina's eyes darkened. "Robert would never agree to that. He's too loyal. He'd see it as abandoning her." Lisa sighed. "I'm worried about you, Sabrina. This isn't healthy. You need to do something before it's too late." Sabrina nodded absently, but her mind was already elsewhere. She had considered every possible solution and always came back to the same conclusion. Miriam had to go. The idea of poisoning her mother-in-law, once a fleeting thought, now seemed like the only viable option. Sabrina began to meticulously plan Miriam's demise. She spent hours researching poisons, focusing on substances that would be difficult to detect. Her background in graphic design gave her an eye for detail, and she applied this skill to her dark new project. She discovered that certain plants, when ingested in small doses over time, could cause symptoms resembling a natural illness. With a plan in place, Sabrina started the next phase, obtaining the poison. She chose aconite, a potent toxin found in monkshood plants. It was a risky choice, but one that could be easily masked in food. She ordered the seeds online, ensuring they were delivered to a friend's address to avoid suspicion. The seeds arrived a few days later, and Sabrina carefully cultivated them in a hidden corner of her garden. She tended to them with a mixture of dread and determination, knowing that each day brought her closer to executing her plan. The process took weeks, during which the tension in the house continued to escalate. Miriam's health, already fragile, began to show signs of further decline. She frequently complained of stomach pains and nausea, symptoms that Sabrina dismissed with a feigned concern. Robert, ever the devoted son, grew increasingly worried, suggesting doctor visits and tests to determine the cause. Sabrina played her part well, expressing appropriate levels of worry and support. She accompanied Miriam to the doctor, reassuring Robert that they were doing everything possible. The doctors attributed Miriam's symptoms to her age and existing health conditions, prescribing medications that did little to alleviate her suffering. The final stage of Sabrina's plan required careful timing. She waited for a day when Robert would be away for an extended period, ensuring she had the house to herself. She prepared a special meal for Miriam, infusing it with a small amount of aconite. The dose was low enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but high enough to exacerbate Miriam's symptoms. As Miriam ate the meal, Sabrina watched her with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. She felt a twisted sense of relief, believing that she was finally taking control of her life. But the act also brought a deep sense of guilt, one that gnawed at her even as she reassured herself that this was the only way. In the days that followed, Miriam's condition worsened. She grew weaker and more lethargic, her complaints of pain more frequent. Robert was beside himself with worry, while Sabrina maintained her facade of concern. The poison was doing its job, slowly but surely, and Sabrina felt both triumphant and terrified at the prospect of what she had set in motion. Sabrina's meticulous planning reached its final stages as she prepared to carry out the poisoning. The growing tension and escalating arguments with Robert only fueled her resolve. She was convinced that eliminating Miriam was the only way to restore harmony to her marriage and reclaim her life. Acquiring the aconite seeds had been a nerve-wracking process. Sabrina knew the risks involved in handling such a potent toxin, but desperation had clouded her judgment. She carefully cultivated the plants, watching them grow with a mix of dread and determination. Each step brought her closer to the point of no return. Sabrina spent hours in her studio, not working on her usual graphic design projects, but refining her plan. She researched the effects of aconite, ensuring she understood the symptoms it would produce. Vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain were common, symptoms that could easily be mistaken for a severe but natural illness in an elderly woman like Miriam. Timing was crucial. Sabrina needed to administer the poison in such a way that it would slowly deteriorate Miriam's health, making her death appear as a natural progression of her existing ailments. She decided to mix small amounts of the aconite into Miriam's food over several weeks, gradually increasing the dosage. Sabrina's first attempt was a simple broth. She chose a day when Robert was working late, giving her the time and privacy she needed. Miriam, unaware of the sinister intent behind the meal, ate the broth without suspicion. Sabrina watched her carefully, noting any signs of discomfort. In the days that followed, Miriam began to complain more frequently of stomach pains and nausea. Sabrina played the concerned daughter-in-law, offering comfort and suggesting they visit the doctor. Robert, seeing Sabrina's apparent dedication, was grateful and less inclined to suspect any foul play. Sabrina continued to administer the poison, each dose carefully calculated to avoid immediate detection. She alternated the methods of delivery, sometimes mixing it into tea, other times blending it into soups or casseroles. Each meal brought Miriam closer to the brink, her health steadily declining. Despite her outward calm, Sabrina was racked with guilt and fear. The enormity of her actions weighed heavily on her, but she convinced herself that this was the only solution. She reminded herself of the life she would regain once Miriam was gone, a life free from the constant strain and arguments. Robert's increasing concern for his mother's health provided Sabrina with the perfect cover. He arranged for multiple doctor visits, each one yielding no definitive answers. The medical professionals attributed Miriam's symptoms to her age and existing conditions, prescribing medications that did little to help. Sabrina's plan seemed to be working flawlessly. Miriam's decline was gradual, and the doctors saw no reason to suspect foul play. Sabrina's meticulous research and careful administration of the poison ensured that Miriam's symptoms matched those of a natural illness. The final dose was administered on a particularly stressful day. Robert had left for an extended business trip, leaving Sabrina and Miriam alone in the house. It was the perfect opportunity to deliver the fatal dose of aconite without immediate suspicion. The house felt unnaturally quiet, a silence that seemed to echo Sabrina's racing thoughts. Sabrina prepared Miriam's favorite soup, a creamy mushroom bisque. She measured the aconite carefully, her hand steady despite the turmoil inside her. This was it. There was no turning back. The poison, now finely ground and nearly invisible, was mixed into the soup with methodical precision. As she carried the bowl to the dining table, Sabrina forced a smile. "Lunch is ready, Miriam. I made your favorite." Miriam, looking frailer than ever, managed a weak smile. "Thank you, dear. You're so kind." Sabrina felt a pang of guilt but quickly suppressed it. She watched as Miriam slowly ate the soup, each spoonful bringing her closer to the end. The meal progressed in a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Miriam's labored breathing. As the poison took effect, Miriam's discomfort became evident. She clutched her stomach, her face contorted in pain. Sabrina maintained her facade of concern, suggesting they call a doctor. But the symptoms progressed rapidly, and soon Miriam was struggling to breathe. Sabrina dialed 911, her voice filled with feigned panic. "My mother-in-law is very ill. Please send an ambulance quickly." The paramedics arrived within minutes, finding Miriam in severe distress. They rushed her to the hospital, with Sabrina following closely behind. In the sterile confines of the emergency room, Sabrina watched as the doctors and nurses worked frantically to save Miriam. She maintained her act, shedding tears and expressing worry, but inside she felt a grim sense of relief. Despite their efforts, Miriam's condition deteriorated rapidly. The poison had done its job, and within hours Miriam passed away. The official cause of death was listed as complications from her existing health issues, exacerbated by her age. The doctors saw no reason to suspect foul play, and Sabrina's plan seemed to have succeeded perfectly. Robert was devastated when he received the news. He returned home immediately, shattered by the loss of his mother. Sabrina played the supportive wife, comforting him through his grief while hiding the dark truth. The funeral was a somber affair, with friends and family gathering to pay their respects. Sabrina's performance was flawless, her sorrow appearing genuine to all who observed, but the guilt gnawed at her. Each time Robert spoke of his mother's kindness and strength, Sabrina felt a stab of remorse. She had taken an innocent life, driven by desperation and resentment. The relief she had expected was overshadowed by the weight of her actions. She had crossed a line and there was no going back. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Robert threw himself into his work, using it as a distraction from his grief. Sabrina, meanwhile, tried to resume her usual routines, but the shadow of her crime loomed large. She found it difficult to concentrate on her graphic design projects, her mind constantly replaying the events of that fateful day. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor, but Sabrina attributed it to the stress of Miriam's death and the strain on her marriage. She continued to put on a brave face, maintaining the facade of a grieving daughter-in-law, but inside she was falling apart. One night, as she lay in bed beside Robert, the enormity of her actions hit her with full force. She had committed murder, taken a life to solve her problems, and now she had to live with the consequences. The thought was overwhelming, and Sabrina found herself trembling with a mix of fear and regret. Robert, sensing her distress, reached out to comfort her. But deep down, she knew that the truth could not remain hidden forever. The seeds of her crime were planted, and it was only a matter of time before they bore fruit. Sabrina's carefully constructed world was built on a foundation of lies, and as the days passed, she began to realize that the price of her actions would be far greater than she had ever imagined. In the aftermath of Miriam's death, life in the Brooks household settled into a somber routine. Robert's grief was palpable, and Sabrina did her best to support him, all the while masking her own turmoil. She believed she had successfully concealed her crime, but the peace she longed for remained elusive. Little did she know, the real consequences of her actions were about to unfold. The initial investigation into Miriam's death was routine. The doctors attributed her passing to natural causes, given her age and existing health conditions. However, a nurse who had been present during Miriam's final hours noticed something odd. The rapid progression of her symptoms seemed unusual, even for someone of her age. The nurse, Emma Collins, mentioned her concerns to the attending physician, Dr. Alan Harris. Emma was experienced and meticulous, not one to jump to conclusions. Dr. Harris, although initially dismissive, agreed to review Miriam's case notes. Upon closer inspection, he too found the rapid deterioration puzzling. They decided to conduct a more thorough autopsy, just to be sure. The autopsy revealed traces of a toxin in Miriam's system, something that should not have been there. Dr. Harris immediately alerted the authorities, and the case was escalated to the Greenwood Police Department. Detective Laura Rogan was assigned to lead the investigation. Detective Rogan was a seasoned investigator with a keen eye for detail. She began by interviewing the medical staff who had attended to Miriam, gathering information about her symptoms and the timeline of her decline. The discovery of the toxin raised alarm bells, and Rogan knew this was no ordinary case. Next, Rogan turned her attention to the Brooks household. She interviewed Robert first, who was devastated by the news of a potential foul play. His genuine shock and grief were evident, and Rogan quickly ruled him out as a suspect. Sabrina, however, presented a more complex picture. Sabrina was composed during the interview, expressing appropriate levels of sadness and concern. But Rogan sensed something was off. There was a guardedness in Sabrina's demeanor, a subtle tension that didn't sit right. Rogan had seen it before, the signs of someone hiding something. Sabrina, when questioned about Miriam's health, reiterated the doctor's findings. She played the role of the caring daughter-in-law, describing how she had tried to make Miriam comfortable and had taken her to the doctor multiple times. But her story seemed rehearsed, and Rogan made a mental note to dig deeper. The detectives decided to search the Brooks house, focusing on areas where they might find evidence of poison. Sabrina grew increasingly anxious as they combed through the kitchen, the garden, and her studio. She tried to maintain her composure, but the stress was evident in her trembling hands and forced calm. In the garden, the detectives found a small patch of monkshood plants, the source of aconite. Rogan's suspicions grew. She sent samples to the lab for analysis, and the results confirmed the presence of aconite, the same toxin found in Miriam's system. The breakthrough came when the detectives discovered Sabrina's internet search history. Her computer revealed extensive research on poisons, specifically aconite, and methods of administering it. The evidence was damning, painting a clear picture of premeditated murder. Rogan confronted Sabrina with the findings. In the face of irrefutable evidence, Sabrina broke down. The facade crumbled, and she confessed to the crime, her voice filled with a mixture of guilt and desperation. She explained how the strain of living with Miriam had driven her to commit the unthinkable, believing it was the only way to save her marriage. The confession shocked Robert to his core. The woman he loved The woman he thought he knew had murdered his mother. His world shattered, and he struggled to comprehend the depth of Sabrina's betrayal. The couple's friends and family were equally stunned, unable to reconcile the image of the charming, creative Sabrina with that of a cold-blooded killer. Sabrina's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. The trial was set to begin 3 months after Sabrina's arrest. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Reed, presented a compelling case built on the extensive evidence gathered by Detective Rogan and her team. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the evidence and testimonies presented. The community held its breath, waiting for the verdict. When the jury finally returned, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty of second-degree murder, Sabrina was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The sentence reflected the severity of her crime, while also acknowledging the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense. For Robert, the verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure. Justice had been served, but the scars left by Sabrina's actions would never fully heal. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a tragic chapter for the Brooks family. Robert, now faced with the task of rebuilding his life, decided to leave Greenwood. The town, once a place of happy memories, had become a constant reminder of his loss. He moved to a different city, seeking a fresh start and hoping to find some semblance of peace. In the end, the Brooks family saga served as a stark reminder of the destructive power of desperation and the importance of compassion, understanding, and mental health support. It was a story that underscored the fragile nature of human relationships and the devastating consequences that could arise when those bonds were pushed to their breaking point. John Harrison, a respected local businessman, was found murdered in his own home. The evidence soon pointed towards his wife, Emily, sparking a scandal that would unravel a complex web of lies, twisted love triangles, deceit, and dark secrets. Emily Harrison, a beautiful woman in her mid-30s, had always been the center of attention. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended amicably, or so it seemed. John, her current husband, had a strained relationship with his younger brother, David. This strained dynamic hid deeper, more sinister connections that would come to light as the investigation unfolded. The murder of John Harrison was not a straightforward case. It was the catalyst that exposed a convoluted love triangle, revealing that everyone involved had motives buried beneath layers of pretense and propriety. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective Tom Reynolds, would soon find themselves entangled in a case that defied simple explanations. The night of the murder, Emily's scream pierced the quiet neighborhood. The first responders arrived at the Harrison residence to find Emily in a state of hysteria, her clothes stained with blood. John's body lay sprawled on the living room floor, a deep gash across his throat. Blood pooled around him, soaking into the carpet. The scene was chaotic, with furniture overturned and signs of a struggle evident. Officer Daniels, the first on the scene, quickly secured the area. He observed Emily, who was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a framed photo of her and John. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain what had happened. "I found him like this. I came home and he was just lying there. I didn't know what to do." Her voice was shaky, her eyes wide with terror, but there was something in her demeanor that didn't quite add up. She was too composed, too rehearsed. Detective Miller arrived shortly after, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She noted the absence of forced entry and the fact that John seemed to have been caught off guard. It suggested that he knew his attacker. Miller's gut instinct told her that this was more than just a burglary gone wrong. As the forensic team began their work, Miller pulled Emily aside for a more detailed statement. Emily recounted her day, carefully avoiding eye contact. She claimed to have been out shopping and returned to find John dead. But there were inconsistencies in her story, small details that didn't align. Detective Reynolds joined Miller, his expression grim. He had spoken with the neighbors, who reported hearing raised voices earlier in the evening. None could identify the second voice, but it was clear that John had not been alone before his death. Miller looked at Reynolds. "This isn't a simple case, Tom. There's more to this than meets the eye." Reynolds nodded in agreement. "Let's dig deeper. Something tells me we're only scratching the surface." The investigation into John Harrison's murder kicked off in earnest the following day. Detectives Miller and Reynolds began their meticulous process of gathering evidence and conducting interviews. The first step was to build a timeline of John's final hours. They discovered that John had left his office around 5 p.m., a bit earlier than usual. His assistant mentioned that he seemed preoccupied, almost distracted. Emily's account placed her at the local mall during this time, but there were no security camera records to confirm her presence. Detective Miller focused on Emily's behavior. She seemed cooperative, yet there was an underlying current of tension. During questioning, Emily maintained her story but frequently glanced at her phone as if expecting a message or call. Miller made a mental note to check her phone records. Meanwhile, Reynolds delved into John's professional life. As a successful real estate developer, John had made a few enemies. Business rivals and disgruntled former employees formed a list of potential suspects. However, none seemed to have a motive strong enough for murder. As they dug deeper, the detectives learned more about Emily's past. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended 5 years ago. The divorce was amicable on paper, but whispers of infidelity and financial disputes lingered. Michael had moved out of town but returned occasionally, supposedly to visit his daughter from another relationship. Detective Miller decided to pay Michael a visit. He lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Michael was a tall, brooding man with a rugged charm. He appeared genuinely shocked when Miller informed him of John's murder. "Emily called me last night," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "She was hysterical, said John was dead. I told her to call the police and then I rushed over. But by the time I got there, the place was crawling with cops. Michael's alibi was shaky, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime." Miller noted his reaction and decided to keep him under surveillance. Back at the station, Reynolds had uncovered a new lead. David Harrison, John's younger brother, had been seen arguing with John several days before the murder. David, a charming but aimless man, had always lived in his brother's shadow. He harbored a deep resentment towards John, fueled by jealousy and financial dependence. David was brought in for questioning. He was visibly nervous, his eyes darting around the room as he spoke. "John and I argued about money," he admitted. "He was going to cut me off, but I didn't kill him." The detectives were skeptical. David's alibi for the night of the murder was weak. He claimed to have been at a bar, but no one could confirm his presence. As they continued to press him, David's story began to unravel. Emily's suspicious behavior, Michael's shaky alibi, and David's deep-seated resentment formed a tangled web. The detectives realized they were dealing with more than just a crime of passion. There were layers of deceit and hidden motives that needed to be peeled back, one by one. John and Emily Harrison appeared to be the quintessential suburban couple. They had a beautiful home, a successful business, and were well-liked in their community. But beneath the veneer of their perfect life, cracks were beginning to show. John had built his real estate empire from the ground up. He was known for his business acumen and ruthless negotiating tactics. However, his professional success came at a personal cost. John's demanding work schedule left little time for his marriage, creating a rift between him and Emily. Emily, on the other hand, had a more complex past. Raised in a wealthy family, she was accustomed to a life of privilege. Her first marriage to Michael Turner had been a whirlwind romance. Michael was a charismatic entrepreneur, but his business ventures often ended in failure. Their relationship was passionate but tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments and infidelity. The divorce had been bitter, with Emily accusing Michael of cheating and financial mismanagement. Michael, in turn, claimed that Emily's spending habits had driven him to the brink of bankruptcy. Despite the acrimony, they managed to part ways without too much public scandal. Michael left town, but he never completely severed ties with Emily. John entered Emily's life shortly after her divorce. He offered stability and security, something she desperately needed. Their courtship was swift, and they married within a year. However, the transition from a tumultuous relationship to a stable one was not easy for Emily. She missed the excitement and unpredictability that Michael had brought into her life. David Harrison, John's younger brother, was another significant figure in the unfolding drama. David had always been the black sheep of the family. He struggled with various addictions and had a string of failed business ventures. John often bailed him out, creating a sense of dependency and resentment. David's relationship with Emily was complex. They had an undeniable chemistry, and their interactions were often charged with unspoken tension. Emily confided in David about her marital problems, and he, in turn, found solace in her company. It was clear to the detectives that there was more to their relationship than met the eye. As Miller and Reynolds dug deeper, they discovered that John had recently made some significant financial moves. He had taken out a large life insurance policy and transferred substantial assets into Emily's name. These actions suggested that John was either planning for the future or anticipating something dire. Emily's spending habits had also come under scrutiny. Despite her outward appearance of concern and grief, her bank records revealed large withdrawals and unexplained expenses. The detectives began to suspect that she might have been planning to leave John and start a new life elsewhere. Michael Turner, though seemingly out of the picture, still harbored feelings for Emily. He had recently come back into town and had been seen meeting with her on several occasions. Their interactions were friendly on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of unresolved tension and unspoken words. The background checks painted a picture of a marriage on the brink, with each character hiding their true intentions behind a facade of normalcy. John was the pillar of the community, Emily the perfect wife, David the troubled brother, and Michael the ex-husband with lingering feelings. But as the detectives would soon discover, appearances could be deceiving. As the investigation progressed, the detectives focused on uncovering the motives behind John Harrison's murder. Each of the main players had reasons, both hidden and overt, that could drive them to such an extreme act. Emily's financial troubles were the most glaring. Despite John's success, their finances were strained. Emily's lavish lifestyle had put them in significant debt. The large life insurance policy John had recently taken out added a sinister layer to this financial stress. If Emily were to benefit from John's death, it would solve all her money problems. Emily's affair with David complicated matters further. Their relationship was more than just a fleeting romance. It was a deeply emotional bond forged out of mutual dissatisfaction and dependency. Michael Turner also had a motive. His lingering feelings for Emily and the unresolved bitterness from their divorce created a volatile mix. Michael's financial instability made him susceptible to desperate measures. His frequent visits to Emily hinted at a rekindled relationship, which could have easily turned into a conspiracy against John. David's resentment towards his brother was well documented. He had lived in John's shadow for most of his life, relying on him for financial support. The argument they had days before the murder centered on money and control. John had threatened to cut David off, a move that would leave him destitute. David's dependence on John created a deep-seated hatred that could have driven him to murder. The detectives also considered the possibility of a joint effort between Emily and David. Their affair, coupled with their financial motives, made them prime suspects. If they conspired together, they could both benefit immensely from John's death. Emily would gain financial freedom, and David would rid himself of his brother's dominance. One evening, Detective Miller received a call from a local bartender who claimed to have seen Emily and David together on the night of the murder. According to the bartender, they appeared to be in an intense conversation, their body language suggesting more than just a casual encounter. This new information put both Emily and David at the scene of the crime around the estimated time of death. Miller and Reynolds brought Emily in for further questioning. Confronted with the bartender's testimony, Emily's composure began to crack. She admitted to meeting David, but insisted they were discussing her troubled marriage and had nothing to do with John's death. David, on the other hand, was less forthcoming. When questioned about his whereabouts, he became defensive and evasive. His alibi, which had already been weak, now seemed even more questionable. The detectives pressed him on his relationship with Emily and the nature of their conversation that night, but David stuck to his story of innocence. Michael Turner also remained a person of interest. His frequent visits to Emily, coupled with his financial troubles, made him a viable suspect. In the midst of these revelations, the detectives encountered several red herrings. One such distraction came in the form of an anonymous tip, suggesting that John was involved in illegal activities. The tip claimed that John had been laundering money through his real estate business. While this lead initially seemed promising, further investigation revealed it to be unfounded. It appeared to be a deliberate attempt to divert the detectives' attention from the true motives behind the murder. Another false lead came from a disgruntled former employee of John's. The employee had a history of making threats against John and had been fired under contentious circumstances. However, after a thorough investigation, it became clear that he had no involvement in the murder. His threats were merely empty words born out of frustration and resentment. The turning point came when Detective Reynolds discovered a series of text messages between Emily and Michael. The messages revealed a rekindling of their romantic relationship and discussed plans to meet secretly. One message in particular stood out. Sent on the day of the murder, it read, "We need to act tonight. John can't find out." Armed with this new evidence, Miller and Reynolds confronted Emily and Michael separately. Emily broke down under the pressure, partially confessing to the affair but denying any involvement in the murder. Michael, however, maintained his innocence, insisting that the messages were taken out of context. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Miller decided to take a closer look at the phone records and financial transactions. She believed that these would provide the concrete evidence needed to tie the suspects to the crime. The phone records revealed a flurry of calls and messages between Emily, David, and Michael in the days leading up to the murder. The communication pattern suggested a coordinated effort, with Emily at the center. On the night of the murder, there were several calls between Emily and David, as well as a brief call to Michael. This triangulation of communication placed all three suspects in contact during the critical hours. Miller also discovered an unusual transaction in Emily's bank account. A large sum of money had been transferred to an offshore account just days before John's death. This transaction, combined with the life insurance policy, suggested that Emily was preparing for a significant change in her financial situation. Armed with this new evidence, the detectives decided to confront Emily once more. This time, they presented her with the phone records and the financial transactions. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Emily's facade of innocence began to crumble. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't want it to come to this. I just wanted out. John was controlling, suffocating. I needed a way out, but I never wanted him dead." Miller pressed further. "Who did you talk to that night, Emily? Why were you and David in contact so frequently?" Emily hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "David and I, we had a plan. We were going to leave John, start fresh, but I swear we never planned to kill him." The detectives knew they needed to hear David's side of the story. When they brought him in for questioning, David initially denied any involvement, but when confronted with the phone records and Emily's partial confession, his resolve weakened. David admitted to meeting Emily on the night of the murder, but claimed that their plan was only to confront John, not to harm him. Emily had convinced him that John would never let her go, and that they needed to make him understand that their relationship was over. Michael's involvement became clearer as the detectives reviewed his financial records. They discovered that he had received a substantial sum of money from an unknown source shortly after John's death. This payment, coupled with the text messages, suggested that Michael was part of the conspiracy. The detectives decided to bring all three suspects in together. In a tense confrontation, they laid out the evidence. Emily's breakdown, David's nervousness, and Michael's defiance created a volatile atmosphere. Miller addressed them. "We know about the affair. We know about the money. It's time to come clean. Who killed John?" Emily, tears streaming down her face, finally confessed. "It was an accident. We confronted John, things got heated, and David lost control. He didn't mean to kill him." David's face paled as he stammered, "It was self-defense. John attacked me and I just reacted. I didn't mean for it to end this way." Michael, realizing the gravity of the situation, added, "I was supposed to help them disappear after. I never thought it would go this far." The detectives had the pieces they needed. The confrontation had turned violent, leading to John's accidental death. Emily and David had panicked, and Michael had stepped in to help cover it up. The murder was a tragic result of a plan gone horribly wrong. With the confessions in hand, the detectives knew they had uncovered the truth. The case was far from simple, but the tangled motives and relationships had finally come to light. The truth was a web of love, betrayal, and desperation. The final confrontation with Emily, David, and Michael marked the culmination of weeks of intense investigation. Detectives Miller and Reynolds had pieced together the intricate puzzle of John Harrison's murder. The courtroom was packed as the trial of Emily, David, and Michael began. The community of Willow Creek, once known for its tranquility, was now a hub of media attention. Reporters and spectators alike were eager to hear the sordid details of the case that had shocked the town. The prosecution laid out a compelling narrative. They described how Emily's affair with David had rekindled old passions, and how their relationship had become a desperate escape from her controlling marriage. The prosecution argued that the financial troubles and the life insurance policy created a powerful motive for murder. Emily's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstances, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage who made poor decisions in a moment of panic. They emphasized that the murder was unplanned and that Emily had no intention of killing her husband. David's defense focused on self-defense. They highlighted John's aggressive behavior and his attack on David, arguing that David had acted out of fear for his life. They portrayed him as a man pushed to his breaking point by years of familial tension and resentment. Michael's defense was the most straightforward. They claimed he had no prior knowledge of the murder plan and that his involvement was limited to helping Emily out of misguided loyalty. He was depicted as an unwitting accomplice, caught up in a situation beyond his control. Throughout the trial, the detectives' meticulous work came to light. The phone records, financial transactions, and confessions all painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to John's death. The jury listened intently as the prosecution and defense presented their cases. On the stand, Emily was a picture of remorse. She recounted the night of the murder in vivid detail, her voice breaking as she described the confrontation with John. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke of her regret and fear. "I loved John," she said, her voice trembling, "but I felt trapped. When David and I confronted him, everything spiraled out of control. I never wanted this to happen." David's testimony was equally emotional. He described the years of living in John's shadow, the constant feeling of inadequacy, and the moment of terror when John attacked him. "I just wanted to protect myself," he said, his voice cracking. "I never meant to kill him. It was an accident." Michael, in his testimony, admitted to helping Emily cover up the murder, but insisted he had no part in the actual killing. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. "I thought I was helping a friend, but I realize now how wrong I was." The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. They emphasized the premeditation involved in the affair and the financial motives. They argued that while the murder might not have been meticulously planned, it was the result of a series of deliberate actions taken by Emily and David. The defense's closing arguments focused on the emotional and psychological aspects of the case. They pleaded for leniency, highlighting the lack of premeditation and the complex web of emotions that led to the tragic event. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Emily and David were found guilty of second-degree murder, acknowledging the crime's emotional context, but also the gravity of their actions. Michael was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact, his role in the cover-up undeniable, but his involvement in the murder itself less clear. As the verdicts were read, the courtroom was silent. Emily Harrison was sentenced to 20 years in prison. David Harrison received a 15-year sentence. Michael Turner, though less directly involved, was sentenced to 5 years for his role in the cover-up. The twisted love triangle that led to John Harrison's murder had unraveled, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The truth, once uncovered, had brought justice, but it had also revealed the depths of human frailty and the devastating consequences of unchecked desires. Emmett Dalton grew up the youngest of 3 siblings. His family owned a small hardware store, which had been in the Dalton family for generations. Emmett was always known as the gentle soul of the family, with a kind word for everyone and a willingness to help anyone in need. He had a close relationship with his parents, who cherished his thoughtful and considerate nature. In school, Emmett was not the most popular kid, but he was well-liked for his easygoing attitude and warm smile. He had a small circle of friends who appreciated his loyalty and sense of humor. After graduating high school, Emmett decided to stay in their home to help his parents run the hardware store. He enjoyed the simple life and found contentment in the routine of small-town living. Emmett's relationship with his family was solid. His older siblings had moved to nearby cities but frequently visited, maintaining a strong bond with their youngest brother. Emmett was particularly close to his sister Rachel, who often confided in him and sought his advice. His parents, though traditional in their ways, were supportive of Emmett and proud of the man he had become. Emmett had a few relationships, none of which were particularly serious. He was looking for someone who shared his values and appreciated the quiet life he enjoyed. Lila Renshaw was a strikingly beautiful woman with an air of mystery that captivated those around her. She grew up in the bustling city of Larkspur, a stark contrast to the quiet town. Lila's upbringing was far from idyllic. Her parents had a hard relationship, marked by frequent arguments and bouts of separation. As an only child, Lila often found herself caught in the middle of their conflicts, learning early on how to manipulate situations to her advantage. In her teenage years, Lila developed a reputation for being headstrong and manipulative. She had a string of relationships, each ending in turmoil due to her controlling nature. Lila thrived on power and control, often pushing her partners to the brink with her demanding and possessive behavior. Despite this, her charm and allure made it difficult for people to see her true nature until it was too late. After finishing high school, Lila moved to town in search of a fresh start. She quickly found a job at a local boutique, where her charisma and sales skills made her a favorite among customers. It was here that she met Emmett Dalton, a regular customer who was immediately taken by her beauty and confidence. To Lila, Emmett seemed like the perfect target, a kind, gentle man who was easy to control. Lila's past relationships had always followed a similar pattern. She would charm her way into her partner's life, gradually isolating them from their friends and family. Once she had established control, her true colors would show, leading to intense arguments and emotional manipulation. Her partners often felt trapped, unable to leave due to Lila's relentless grip on their lives. When Lila met Emmett, she saw him as another challenge, someone she could mold and control. She was drawn to his kindness and vulnerability, seeing them as weaknesses she could exploit. Emmett's trusting nature made it easy for Lila to weave her way into his life, slowly isolating him from those who cared about him. To the outside world, Lila and Emmett appeared to be a happy couple, but behind closed doors, a much darker story was unfolding. Emmett first met Lila on a warm summer afternoon at the local boutique. He was shopping for a birthday gift for his mother when Lila, with her striking looks and confident demeanor, offered to help him. Their interaction was brief, but left a lasting impression on Emmett. He couldn't stop thinking about her radiant smile and the way she seemed genuinely interested in helping him. A few days later, Emmett returned to the boutique, this time with the intention of asking Lila out. To his delight, she accepted, and they arranged to meet for coffee at a quaint cafe in town. Their first date was filled with laughter and easy conversation. Lila was charming and attentive, asking Emmett about his life, his family, and his dreams. Emmett felt an immediate connection, believing he had finally found someone who truly understood him. As their relationship progressed, Emmett's friends and family noticed how happy he seemed. Lila often joined him at family gatherings and social events, quickly becoming a familiar face in the community. She seemed to fit right in, and Emmett's parents were pleased to see their son so content. However, there were subtle changes in Emmett that only those closest to him noticed. Lila's charm had a way of overshadowing her more manipulative tendencies. She began to subtly influence Emmett's decisions, steering him away from activities and people she deemed unnecessary. At first, it was small things, like suggesting they spend more time alone together or questioning the motives of his friends. Emmett, eager to please Lila and maintain the harmony of their relationship, often acquiesced to her demands. Lila was meticulous in her approach. She never directly forbade Emmett from seeing his friends or family, but she planted seeds of doubt in his mind. She would mention how certain friends didn't seem to appreciate him, or how his family was overly critical. Emmett, who had always been sensitive to others' opinions, began to internalize these suggestions, gradually distancing himself from his loved ones. Despite these changes, Emmett remained convinced that Lila was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He admired her confidence and believed that she had his best interests at heart. Lila, on the other hand, was pleased with how easily she had managed to isolate Emmett. She felt a sense of power knowing that she was the center of his world, controlling his actions and decisions. Their relationship continued to deepen, with Emmett becoming more dependent on Lila for emotional support and validation. Lila, aware of her influence, began to tighten her grip, ensuring that Emmett had little to no contact with anyone outside their relationship. To the outside world, they appeared to be a perfect couple, but behind closed doors, the dynamics were far more sinister. Emmett's once vibrant social life dwindled to nothing, leaving him isolated and completely under Lila's control. As the months passed, Lila's control over Emmett grew stronger. She employed subtle yet effective methods to isolate him from his family and friends, ensuring that he remained entirely dependent on her. It started with casual suggestions and offhand comments, but gradually, her tactics became more manipulative and deliberate. One evening, as Emmett prepared to meet his sister Rachel for dinner, Lila expressed concern about his family's influence on him. She mentioned how they always seemed to criticize their relationship and hinted that perhaps they didn't truly want him to be happy. Emmett, already sensitive to his family's opinions, began to doubt their intentions. He canceled the dinner, opting instead to stay home with Lila. Lila also made it a point to be present whenever Emmett received phone calls from friends or family. She would sit close by, making him uncomfortable and self-conscious about the conversation. Over time, Emmett's calls to his loved ones became less frequent as he grew tired of the tension it caused. His friends noticed his absence from social gatherings and reached out, but Lila always found a way to intercept their messages or make excuses for why Emmett couldn't attend. Lila's control extended to Emmett's daily routines and activities. She insisted on accompanying him everywhere, from grocery shopping to his volunteer work at the local community center. Emmett, eager to keep the peace, didn't resist. He began to feel suffocated, but he couldn't pinpoint the source of his discomfort. Lila's constant presence and influence made it difficult for him to think clearly or make decisions independently. One particularly telling incident occurred when Emmett's childhood friend, Leo, invited him on a weekend fishing trip. Emmett, excited about the prospect of reconnecting with Leo, shared the news with Lila. Her reaction was swift and intense. She questioned Leo's motives, suggesting that he was trying to pull Emmett away from their relationship. Lila accused Emmett of being inconsiderate, claiming that he was abandoning her for a frivolous outing. Emmett, caught off guard by her emotional outburst, reluctantly declined Leo's invitation. Lila's manipulation didn't stop there. She began to control Emmett's finances, convincing him to merge their bank accounts for convenience. This move further isolated Emmett, as he now had limited access to his own money. Lila monitored his spending closely, questioning every purchase and often overriding his decisions. Emmett felt increasingly powerless, unable to assert himself without facing Lila's wrath. Despite these red flags, Emmett continued to believe that Lila had his best interests at heart. He rationalized her behavior as a sign of her deep love and commitment to their relationship. However, the isolation took a toll on his mental and emotional well-being. He became withdrawn and anxious, struggling to reconcile his love for Lila with the growing sense of entrapment. Lila, sensing Emmett's inner turmoil, doubled down on her efforts to isolate him. She discouraged him from seeking help or confiding in others, framing it as a betrayal of their trust. Emmett, already emotionally fragile, complied. He cut off contact with the few remaining friends and family members he had left, fully entrusting his life to Lila's control. As the months turned into a year, Emmett's world became smaller and more confined. His once vibrant and fulfilling life was reduced to the narrow confines of his relationship with Lila. The community, unaware of the turmoil behind closed doors, continued to see them as a happy couple. Despite Lila's control, there were moments when he longed for the comfort and support of his family and friends. These flickers of desire for connection were met with resistance from Lila, who sensed that she was losing her grip on him. One afternoon, Emmett found himself standing outside the hardware store, reminiscing about the days when he would work alongside his father. He missed the camaraderie of the small community and the simple joys of his previous life. On an impulse, he decided to visit his parents, hoping for a moment of normalcy and perhaps a chance to explain his absence. When Emmett arrived at his parents' house, they were overjoyed to see him. His mother, Eleanor, embraced him tightly, her eyes filled with concern. His father, Thomas, greeted him with a firm handshake, his expression a mix of relief and worry. Emmett felt a surge of emotion as he sat down with his parents, who eagerly caught him up on family news and events. For a brief moment, Emmett felt like himself again, surrounded by the warmth and familiarity of his family. However, as the visit progressed, he could sense Lila's disapproval hanging over him like a dark cloud. She had called him multiple times during the visit, each call more insistent than the last. Emmett's parents noticed his unease and gently probed, asking if everything was all right. Emmett hesitated, but eventually confided in his parents about the strain he was feeling. He didn't go into detail about Lila's manipulative behavior, but he mentioned feeling overwhelmed and isolated. Eleanor and Thomas listened attentively, offering their support and urging Emmett to reach out more often. They assured him that he was always welcome and that they would help him in any way they could. Leaving his parents' house that day, Emmett felt a glimmer of hope. He resolved to reconnect with his family and friends, believing that their support would help him regain a sense of normalcy. However, when he returned home, Lila was waiting for him, her eyes cold and calculating. Lila's anger was palpable. She accused Emmett of betraying her trust and undermining their relationship. She framed his visit to his parents as a deliberate attempt to distance himself from her. Emmett, caught off guard by her intensity, tried to explain that he simply missed his family and needed their support. But Lila wouldn't hear of it. She berated him, using emotional manipulation to make him feel guilty and ashamed. The following days were a nightmare for Emmett. Lila's controlling behavior escalated, and she became more possessive and paranoid. She monitored his every move, checking his phone and questioning his whereabouts. Emmett felt trapped, unable to breathe under the suffocating weight of her control. Despite Lila's efforts, Emmett managed to reach out to his sister Rachel through discreet messages. Rachel, sensing her brother's distress, agreed to meet him in secret. They met at a secluded park, where Emmett poured out his heart, revealing the extent of Lila's manipulation and control. Rachel was horrified and immediately offered her support, vowing to help Emmett break free from Lila's grasp. Emmett's attempts to reconnect with his loved ones were fraught with challenges. Lila's influence was pervasive, and she used every tool at her disposal to maintain her control over him. However, the seeds of doubt had been planted in Emmett's mind. He began to see through Lila's facade, recognizing her manipulative tactics for what they were. The more he tried to reconnect with his family and friends, the more determined he became to regain his independence and escape from Lila's clutches. The tension between Emmett and Lila reached a boiling point one fateful evening. Emmett had been secretly meeting with his sister Rachel, seeking her support and advice on how to extricate himself from Lila's control. Rachel, deeply concerned for her brother's well-being, urged him to leave Lila and return to his family. Emmett, emboldened by his sister's encouragement, decided it was time to confront Lila and end their toxic relationship. Emmett chose a quiet Sunday afternoon to break the news to Lila. He hoped that the calmness of the day would help keep the situation from escalating. As they sat in their living room, Emmett took a deep breath and told Lila that he needed some space and time apart. He explained that he felt suffocated and isolated, and that he needed to reconnect with his family and friends to find himself again. Lila's reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused Emmett of being ungrateful and selfish, of abandoning the relationship they had built together. Her voice rose in anger, and she began to hurl insults and accusations, attempting to undermine Emmett's resolve. She claimed that his family and friends didn't truly care about him, that they only wanted to control him and pull him away from her. Emmett tried to remain calm, but Lila's relentless tirade wore him down. He felt a mix of anger, guilt, and sadness as he listened to her venomous words. Despite her emotional manipulation, Emmett knew that he couldn't continue living under her control. He stood his ground, repeating his need for space and asserting that he was making the decision for his own well-being. Lila, realizing that her usual tactics were not working, shifted her approach. She broke down in tears, pleading with Emmett to reconsider. She promised to change, to give him more freedom, and to be more understanding. Emmett, seeing through her manipulative behavior, remained firm in his decision. He told her that he needed to leave, and that it was the best thing for both of them. The atmosphere in the room grew tense and charged with emotion. Lila's tears quickly turned to anger again, and she lashed out, accusing Emmett of cheating and betrayal. Emmett, exhausted and emotionally drained, decided to leave the house for a while to clear his head. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, leaving Lila seething with rage. When Emmett finally returned home, he found Lila waiting for him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She approached him with a calm demeanor, apologizing for her outburst and begging for another chance. Emmett, though sympathetic to her pain, stood his ground and reiterated his need for space. That night, as Emmett tried to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Lila's behavior had become increasingly erratic, and he feared that her desperation might drive her to do something drastic. His instincts were correct. In the early hours of the morning, Emmett was awakened by a noise in the living room. He got up to investigate and found Lila sitting on the couch, clutching a large kitchen knife. Her eyes were wild with desperation and anger. Emmett's heart raced as he tried to talk her down, But Lila's mind was made up. She accused Emmett of ruining her life, of turning everyone against her. In a fit of rage, she lunged at him with the knife. Emmett managed to dodge her initial attack, but Lila was relentless. A struggle ensued, with Emmett trying to disarm Lila while avoiding her frantic swings. In the chaos, Lila's grip on the knife slipped, and Emmett seized the opportunity to wrest it from her hand. In the aftermath of the struggle, both were left breathless and shaken. Emmett, now holding the knife, dropped it and stepped back, giving Lila space to calm down. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Emmett knew he had to leave. He quickly packed a bag and, without looking back, walked out of the house, leaving Lila behind. He drove to his parents' home, where he was welcomed with open arms as he told them everything that just happened. Emmett knew that the road to recovery would be long and difficult, but he was ready to take the first step. Lila, consumed by a mix of rage and despair, couldn't accept the loss of control over Emmett. Her mind raced with thoughts of revenge and retribution. She felt humiliated and abandoned, and her desperation turned into a dangerous resolve. In the days following Emmett's departure, Lila's behavior became increasingly insane. She spent hours pacing the house, plotting ways to regain control over Emmett. Her anger festered, and she began to see his decision to leave as an unforgivable betrayal. Lila convinced herself that Emmett's family and friends were to blame for his decision, and she resolved to make him pay for abandoning her. One evening, as Emmett was visiting his parents, Lila devised a plan. She knew that Emmett often took a walk through a secluded part of town in the evenings to clear his head. She decided to confront him there, away from prying eyes. Armed with the same kitchen knife from their previous altercation, Lila set out to intercept Emmett. As Emmett approached a secluded park, he was startled to see Lila standing there, her eyes fixed on him. He stopped in his tracks, a mix of fear and sadness washing over him. Lila's appearance was disheveled, and her eyes burned with a dangerous intensity. Emmett knew that this confrontation could not end well. Lila's voice was cold and menacing. As she accused Emmett of ruining her life, she blamed him for her misery and demanded that he return to her. Emmett tried to reason with her, explaining that their relationship was toxic and that he needed to move on for his own well-being. But Lila was beyond reason. In a sudden violent outburst, Lila lunged at Emmett with the knife. Emmett tried to defend himself, but Lila's rage gave her a frightening strength. A struggle ensued, with Emmett desperately trying to disarm her. In the chaos, Lila managed to stab Emmett, the blade piercing his side. Emmett cried out in pain, but Lila showed no signs of stopping. As Emmett fell to the ground, clutching his wound, Lila stood over him, her face contorted with fury and madness. Emmett, weakened and bleeding, pleaded with her to stop, but his words fell on deaf ears. Lila, consumed by her desire for control and revenge, delivered a final fatal blow. The once peaceful park was now a crime scene, with Emmett lying lifeless on the ground. Lila, covered in his blood, stood there for a moment, her mind slowly registering the reality of what she had done. Realizing that she couldn't stay there, Lila fled the scene, leaving Emmett's body behind. She drove aimlessly through the night, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. She knew that it was only a matter of time before the police would come looking for her. The next morning, Emmett's body was discovered by a passerby who immediately called the police. The murder of Emmett Dalton sent shockwaves through the community, a town unaccustomed to such violence. The local police, led by Detective Samuel Carter, launched a thorough investigation to uncover the truth behind Emmett's tragic death. As the news spread, the tight-knit community rallied around Emmett's family, offering support and demanding justice. Detective Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, began his work by examining the crime scene. The secluded park where Emmett's body was found offered little in the way of witnesses, but the brutality of the attack indicated a crime of passion. The wounds on Emmett's body suggested a frenzied assault, pointing to someone who knew him well. The investigation quickly focused on Lila Renshaw, Emmett's estranged girlfriend. Neighbors and acquaintances described their tumultuous relationship, with several recounting instances of Lila's controlling behavior. Emmett's family provided crucial insights into the couple's recent conflicts and Emmett's attempts to distance himself from Lila. These testimonies painted a picture of a relationship marked by manipulation, culminating in a fatal confrontation. Detective Carter and his team conducted a thorough search of Lila's home, uncovering several pieces of incriminating evidence. They found Emmett's blood on Lila's clothing and the kitchen knife used in the attack hidden in a drawer. Lila's phone records showed multiple calls to Emmett on the night of the murder, further implicating her in the crime. As the evidence mounted, the police issued an arrest warrant for Lila. She was located in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, attempting to evade capture. When the police arrived, Lila offered little resistance, her demeanor one of resignation. The trial was a highly publicized event, drawing attention from the local community. Emmett's family attended every session, their presence a poignant reminder of the loss they had suffered. The prosecution presented a compelling case, detailing Lila's manipulative behavior and the violent nature of the crime. Witnesses testified about Lila's possessiveness and her efforts to isolate Emmett from his loved ones. Lila's defense team attempted to portray her as a victim of circumstance, arguing that she had acted in a moment of emotional turmoil. However, the overwhelming evidence, coupled with Lila's lack of remorse, left little room for doubt. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. Lila was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Her conviction brought a sense of closure to Emmett's family, though the pain of their loss would never fully heal. The community mourned the senseless death of one of its own, grappling with the realization that such darkness could exist in their midst. The story of Emmett Dalton and Lila Renshaw became a lasting reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing the signs of abuse. It highlighted the need for community support and the power of collective action in creating a safer world for everyone. The year was 2018, and what began as a seemingly ordinary romance between two young adults would spiral into a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. Michelle Marsters, a 26-year-old aspiring writer with a troubled past, and Jake Brendan, a 28-year-old software engineer from a close-knit family, were an unlikely pair. Their whirlwind romance captivated their friends and family at first, but as time went on, those closest to them began to sense that something was amiss. Michelle Marsters' childhood was a tapestry of instability and emotional turmoil. Born to a single mother who struggled with substance abuse, Michelle spent her formative years bouncing between relatives' homes and foster care. The constant upheaval left deep scars on her psyche, manifesting in an intense fear of abandonment and a desperate need for control in her relationships. As a teenager, Michelle found solace in writing, pouring her pain and longing onto the pages of countless journals. Her talent for crafting vivid narratives earned her a scholarship to a local community college, where she excelled in creative writing courses. However, her personal life remained tumultuous, marked by a series of volatile relationships that always seemed to end in heartbreak and betrayal. Jake Brendan, on the other hand, grew up in a warm and loving household. The middle child of 3, Jake was raised by parents who prioritized family bonds and open communication. Family dinners were a nightly occurrence in the Brendan home, and weekends were often spent on camping trips or gathered around board games. This nurturing environment fostered Jake's natural inclination towards kindness and his strong sense of loyalty to those he loved. Academically gifted, Jake breezed through school and earned a full ride to a prestigious university where he studied computer science. His easygoing nature and quick wit made him popular among his peers, and he maintained a close circle of friends from high school through his college years. Michelle and Jake's paths crossed at a local coffee shop. Michelle, hunched over her laptop, was startled when Jake accidentally bumped into her table, nearly spilling her latte. Flustered, Jake insisted on buying her a new drink, and what started as an awkward encounter quickly blossomed into an engaging conversation about literature, technology, and their shared love of obscure indie films. Drawn to Jake's warmth and stability, Michelle found herself opening up in a way she never had before. Jake, in turn, was captivated by Michelle's passion for storytelling and her apparent vulnerability. They exchanged numbers that night, and within weeks they were practically inseparable. The early days of their relationship were a whirlwind of romantic gestures and shared adventures. Michelle introduced Jake to the world of local poetry slams and art galleries, while Jake taught Michelle the basics of coding and took her on hikes to his favorite scenic spots. To their friends, they seemed like the perfect couple, Jake's calm demeanor perfectly complementing Michelle's creative energy. However, As the honeymoon phase began to wane, subtle cracks started to appear in their idyllic romance. Michelle's need for constant reassurance and her discomfort with Jake's close relationships with his family and friends began to surface. What Jake initially perceived as endearing clinginess slowly morphed into something more sinister. As Michelle and Jake's relationship progressed past the 6-month mark, the initial euphoria of new love began to give way to a more complex and troubling dynamic. Michelle's past traumas and abandonment issues, long simmering beneath the surface, started to manifest in increasingly problematic ways. It started subtly at first. Michelle would text Jake incessantly throughout the day, growing anxious and irritable if he didn't respond promptly. She began to question his whereabouts when they weren't together, often asking for photographic evidence of his location. Jake, attributing this behavior to Michelle's deep affection for him, initially found it endearing and did his best to accommodate her needs. However, Michelle's demands for Jake's time and attention soon began to escalate. She would grow visibly upset when Jake made plans with his friends or family, often guilt-tripping him into canceling to spend time with her instead. Jake's best friend since childhood, Michael, was the first to voice his concerns. During a rare guys' night out, Michael confronted Jake about his increasing absence from their social circle. "Jake, you've barely hung out with us in months. What's going on, man? Is everything okay with you and Michelle?" Jake brushed off Michael's worries, insisting that he was just busy and that everything was fine. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right in his relationship with Michelle. As weeks turned into months, Michelle's behavior became increasingly erratic and controlling. She began to monitor Jake's social media accounts, questioning him about every female interaction, no matter how innocuous. She insisted on knowing his phone password and would often scroll through his messages while he slept. Jake's family, once warmly welcoming of Michelle, started to grow wary of her influence on their son and brother. Sarah Brendan, Jake's mother, was particularly concerned. She noticed how Jake had become withdrawn and less communicative, a stark contrast to the open and affectionate son she had raised. During a family dinner that Michelle reluctantly attended, tensions came to a head. When Sarah innocently asked Jake about his plans to attend his cousin's upcoming wedding, Michelle interjected before he could respond. "We're actually thinking of taking a trip that weekend, aren't we, Jake?" she said, her voice sickly sweet but her eyes flashing with warning. Jake, caught off guard, stumbled through a non-committal response, much to his family's visible dismay. After dinner, Sarah pulled her son aside, her voice low and urgent. "Jake, honey, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you missing family events, barely calling. Is everything all right with Michelle?" Michelle, overhearing the exchange, flew into a rage on the drive home. She accused Jake of allowing his family to come between them, twisting the situation to paint herself as the victim. "Your mother hates me, Jake. She's trying to poison you against me. Can't you see that?" Torn between his love for Michelle and his deep-rooted family ties, Jake found himself walking an increasingly precarious tightrope. He began to make excuses to his family and friends, gradually withdrawing from social engagements and family gatherings to keep the peace with Michelle. As Jake's world shrank to revolve almost entirely around Michelle, her paranoia and possessiveness only intensified. She began to see threats to their relationship everywhere, in Jake's co-workers, in casual interactions with strangers, and especially in his family's attempts to maintain a connection with him. As Michelle's grip on Jake's life tightened, a part of him began to resist. The values instilled by his upbringing, the importance of family, the strength of long-standing friendships started to reassert themselves. This internal conflict came to a head on a chilly November evening, nearly a year into their relationship. Jake received a call from his sister, Lauren, informing him that their father had been hospitalized with a suspected heart attack. Without hesitation, Jake grabbed his keys, ready to rush to the hospital. Michelle, however, had other ideas. "Jake, you can't go," she pleaded. "We were supposed to have dinner together. You promised." Jake, torn between his worry for his father and his fear of upsetting Michelle, tried to reason with her. Michelle's face contorted with rage. "Your family again," she spat. "They're always trying to take you away from me. If you leave now, don't bother coming back." For the first time, Jake saw through the haze of manipulation. The absurdity of Michelle's demand in the face of a family emergency snapped something inside him. Without another word, he walked out the door, leaving Michelle screaming behind him. At the hospital, surrounded by the warmth and support of his family, Jake felt as if he was waking from a long, confusing dream. His father's condition, thankfully, turned out to be less serious than initially feared. As Jake sat in the waiting room, his mother gently broached the subject they had all been avoiding. Jake, his defenses weakened by the night's events, finally opened up. He shared with his mother the extent of Michelle's controlling behavior, her jealousy, and her attempts to isolate him. Sarah listened, her heart breaking for her son, but also relieved that he was finally seeing the truth. Over the next few days, as his father recovered, Jake spent more time with his family. He reconnected with friends he had neglected, realizing how much he had missed their company. Michelle's incessant calls and messages went unanswered, as Jake took time to reflect on their relationship. When Jake finally returned to the apartment he shared with Michelle, he was resolved to end things. Michelle, however, sensed the shift in Jake's demeanor and launched into a preemptive attack. "It's your mother, isn't it? She's turned you against me. I knew she hated me." Michelle's words devolved into a torrent of abuse aimed at Jake's family, particularly his mother. "Jake, I can't do this anymore. I won't cut my family out of my life for you or anyone else." As Jake turned to leave, Michelle's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. Jake left, shaken but determined, unaware of the chilling prophecy contained in Michelle's parting words. The events of March 15, 2019 would forever be etched in the memories of Queenstown's residents. It began as an ordinary Friday, people hurrying to work, children boarding school buses, the usual rhythm of small-town life in full swing. For Sarah Brendan, it started as a day like any other, filled with routine tasks and errands. Sarah had just returned home from her morning yoga class, her mind preoccupied with plans for the weekend. Jake had promised to come over for a family dinner on Sunday, the first in months, and Sarah was determined to make it special. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street, but thought nothing of it. Humming softly, Sarah unlocked her front door and stepped inside, her arms laden with groceries. She didn't notice the shadow that detached itself from the side of the house and silently followed her in. Michelle Marsters, her eyes wild with a manic gleam, had been waiting for hours. In her delusional state, she had convinced herself that Sarah was the root of all her problems. Remove Sarah, she thought, and Jake would be hers completely. As Sarah bent to set her bags on the kitchen counter, Michelle struck. With a guttural cry of rage, she brought a heavy cast-iron skillet, grabbed from Sarah's own kitchen, crashing down on the woman's head. Sarah crumpled to the floor, dazed and disoriented. Blood trickled from a gash on her scalp. Michelle, consumed by her frenzy, didn't stop. She brought the skillet down again and again, Sarah's weak attempts at self-defense growing feebler with each blow. When it was over, Michelle stood panting over Sarah's motionless form. Blood spattered her clothes and face. In Michelle's twisted mind, she had done what was necessary. She had eliminated the threat to her relationship with Jake. Now, she reasoned, he would have no choice but to turn to her for comfort and support. With a clinical detachment that would later disturb even seasoned investigators, Michelle set about staging the scene. She ransacked the house, overturning furniture and emptying drawers, creating the illusion of a robbery gone wrong. She pocketed Sarah's jewelry and cash, planning to dispose of them later. In the bathroom, Michelle scrubbed the blood from her skin and changed into clean clothes she had brought with her. She wrapped her stained garments and the skillet in a plastic bag, intending to discard them far from the scene. As a final touch, Michelle used Sarah's own phone to send a text to Jake. "Looking forward to Sunday dinner, sweetheart. Love you." It was a chilling detail that would later send shivers down the spines of those involved in the case. Confident that she had covered her tracks, Michelle left the Brendan home as quietly as she had entered. To any passers-by, she would have looked like any other young woman going about her day, not someone who had just committed a brutal murder. Michelle drove to a remote area outside of town, where she burned her bloodied clothes and tossed the skillet into a deep pond. Returning to her apartment, Michelle began to craft her alibi. She called a friend, chatting normally about weekend plans. She posted on social media, careful to establish a timeline that placed her far from the Brendan home at the time of the murder. Then she waited. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, Michelle's phone rang. It was Jake, his voice cracking with emotion. "Michelle," he sobbed, "something terrible has happened. It's my mom, she's dead." Michelle's performance was Oscar-worthy. She gasped in shock, her voice filled with false concern and sympathy. "Oh my God, Jake, what happened? Are you okay? Where are you? I'm coming right over." Everything was going according to plan. Soon, she thought, Jake would be utterly dependent on her. The discovery of Sarah Brendan's body sent shockwaves through the quiet community. Jake, worried when his mother didn't answer his calls about Sunday dinner, had driven to her house to check on her. The scene that greeted him would haunt him for years to come. Detective Lisa Martinez, a veteran of the police department, took charge of the investigation. From the moment she stepped into the Brendan home, something about the scene didn't sit right with her. While it appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, certain details nagged at her experienced instincts. The house had been ransacked, true, but in a way that seemed almost methodical, rather than the chaotic ransacking typical of a panicked burglar. Valuable electronics were left untouched, while jewelry and cash were missing. Most tellingly, there were no signs of forced entry. As the forensics team combed through the house, Detective Martinez began the painful process of interviewing the family. Jake, still in shock, could barely string together coherent sentences. His father, recently released from the hospital, was devastated and confused. It was Jake's sister Lauren who provided the first piece of the puzzle that would ultimately lead to Michelle. Detective Lauren said, "I don't know if this is important, but Jake's girlfriend, Michelle, she's been acting really strange lately. She seemed obsessed with Jake, always trying to keep him away from us." Martinez's interest was piqued. She gently probed for more information, and Lauren opened up about the gradual isolation Jake had experienced, the tension between Michelle and their mother, and the recent confrontation that had led to Jake spending more time with his family. The detective's suspicions grew as she interviewed Jake's friends and coworkers. A picture began to emerge of Michelle as a controlling, paranoid partner who had systematically attempted to cut Jake off from his support network. However, suspicion was not proof, and Martinez knew she needed hard evidence. Forensics provided the next breakthrough. Despite the killer's efforts to clean up, trace amounts of blood were found in areas inconsistent with the location of Sarah's body. DNA analysis would later confirm it was a mix of Sarah's blood and the killer's. Moreover, fibers found on Sarah's clothing didn't match anything in her home. Martinez's team began the painstaking process of checking traffic cameras and interviewing neighbors. One elderly woman recalled seeing a car similar to Michelle's parked on the street the morning of the murder, but couldn't be certain. As the investigation progressed, Martinez brought Michelle in for questioning. Michelle arrived at the station projecting an image of concern and cooperation, but the detective's trained eye noted the subtle signs of anxiety, the slight tremor in her hands, the occasional darting of her eyes. "Michelle," Martinez began, her tone casual, "can you tell me where you were on the morning of March 15th? Michelle's response was smooth, rehearsed. She claimed to have been at a local cafe, working on her latest writing project. She even produced a receipt as proof, but something about her story didn't add up. Martinez decided to take a risk. "Michelle," she said, leaning forward, "we have a witness who saw your car near the Brendan home on the morning of the murder. Want to revise your statement?" Michelle's composure cracked for just a moment, a flash of panic in her eyes, a slight hitch in her breathing. She quickly recovered, vehemently denying the accusation, but Martinez had seen enough. The investigation was far from over, but Martinez felt they were on the right track. Little did she know that the case was about to break wide open, thanks to an unexpected source, Jake himself. In the days following his mother's murder, Jake Brendan found himself in a fog of grief and confusion. Michelle was a constant presence, offering comfort and support. As the initial shock began to wear off, Jake started to notice inconsistencies in Michelle's behavior that gnawed at him. It was a small thing that first aroused his suspicions. While looking for a photo of his mother for the funeral service, Jake came across Michelle's journal. Normally, he would have respected her privacy, but a nagging feeling prompted him to open it. What he found chilled him to the bone. Page after page was filled with increasingly paranoid and violent rants about his mother. "Sarah's trying to turn him against me. She has to be stopped. I'm the only one who truly loves him." The last entry, dated the day before the murder, read simply, "Tomorrow I'll fix everything." He wanted to dismiss the idea, but too many pieces were falling into place. Michelle's obsessive behavior, her hatred of his mother, her insistence on being with him constantly since the murder. Torn between his loyalty to Michelle and his growing suspicions, Jake decided to confide in Detective Martinez. He brought the journal to the police station, his hands shaking as he handed it over. "I think Michelle might have had something to do with my mom's death." Martinez's team quickly obtained a warrant to search Michelle and Jake's apartment. Hidden in the back of a closet, they found a bag containing Sarah's missing jewelry. In a stroke of luck, The pond where Michelle had disposed of the murder weapon had been partially drained for maintenance, revealing the blood-stained skillet. As the evidence mounted, Michelle's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Her alibi fell apart under scrutiny. The cafe receipt she had produced was for a different day, and security footage showed her car leaving town in the direction of the Brendan home on the morning of the murder. Jake, grappling with the betrayal and the horrifying realization of what Michelle had done, agreed to cooperate with the police. In a recorded phone call, he confronted Michelle about his suspicions. Caught off guard, Michelle's responses were incriminating. "Why did you do it, Michelle? I loved you." Michelle's response was chilling in its delusion. "I did it for us, Jake," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Your mother was trying to keep us apart. Now we can be together forever. Don't you see? It was the only way." With this final piece of evidence, Detective Martinez moved to make an arrest. The stage was set for Michelle's arrest, but even Martinez couldn't have predicted the dramatic turn of events that would unfold as they moved to take her into custody. Michelle, unaware that her world was about to come crashing down, was inside a bookstore. Martinez had decided on a public arrest to minimize the risk of Michelle doing something desperate. As Michelle exited the store, two plainclothes officers approached her casually. "Michelle Marsters?" One of them said, "We need you to come with us." For a moment, Michelle froze, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Then, in a burst of panic, she turned and ran. She made it only a few steps before Martinez tackled her to the ground. As the detective handcuffed her, Michelle began to scream. "You don't understand. I did it for love. Jake needs me." At the police station, Michelle was led to an interrogation room where Martinez was waiting. For hours, Michelle maintained her innocence, her story becoming increasingly convoluted as she tried to explain away the evidence. Martinez watched patiently, waiting for the right moment to break through Michelle's defenses. Finally, as exhaustion and the weight of her lies began to take their toll, Martinez played her trump card. She placed Jake's journal in front of Michelle. "Jake found your journal. He knows what you did." The effect was immediate. Michelle's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He wasn't supposed to find out," she whispered. "It was supposed to be our fresh start." What followed was a chilling confession that left even the seasoned detective shaken. Michelle described in vivid detail how she had planned and carried out Sarah's murder, her voice devoid of remorse as she recounted the brutal attack. "I had to do it," Michelle insisted, her eyes fever bright. "Sarah was poisoning Jake against me. She never understood our love. With her gone, Jake would need me. We would be together forever." When the confession was complete, Michelle seemed to deflate, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "What's going to happen to me?" she asked, suddenly sounding very young and afraid. The prosecutor presented a methodical, airtight case. She walked the jury through the evidence. The DNA found at the crime scene, the murder weapon recovered from the pond, the damning entries in Michelle's journal, and finally, Michelle's own recorded confession. Perhaps the most powerful moment of the prosecution's case came when Jake took the stand. His testimony was heart-wrenching, detailing the gradual isolation he experienced and his growing unease with Michelle's behavior. The defense faced an uphill battle. Given the overwhelming evidence, Stevenson opted for a mental health defense, arguing that Michelle's troubled background and psychological issues had left her incapable of distinguishing right from wrong. Psychiatrists took the stand, offering conflicting opinions on Michelle's mental state. Dr. Samantha Wright, testifying for the defense, diagnosed Michelle with borderline personality disorder and argued that her extreme fear of abandonment had driven her to commit the murder. Throughout the trial, Michelle sat at the defense table, often appearing detached from the proceedings. After a week-long trial, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned after just 6 hours with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Michelle finally broke her eerie calm, collapsing in sobs. Michelle Marsters, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, retreated into a world of fantasy behind bars. She continued to write, filling notebooks with stories of star-crossed lovers and tragic romances, unable or unwilling to fully grasp the reality of her crimes. For the residents of Queenstown, the case served as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from where we least expect them. It was a tragedy that would be remembered for years to come, a cautionary tale about the dark side of love and the devastating consequences of unchecked obsession. The Carson family lived in a picturesque suburban neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and an aura of tranquility. Richard Carson, a well-respected accountant, and his wife, Sophia, a beloved elementary school teacher, seemed to embody the perfect American dream. They had 2 children, Anna and Tyler, who were the pride and joy of their parents. One crisp autumn morning, the facade of perfection shattered. Richard Carson returned home from a weekend fishing trip with his friends to find the house eerily silent. The usual warmth and cheer were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. He called out for Sophia but received no response. Anxiety gnawed at him as he climbed the stairs to their bedroom. The sight that greeted him was every husband's nightmare. Sophia lay motionless on the bed, her skin a pale hue that contrasted starkly with the dark, dried blood staining the sheets. Richard's heart pounded as he rushed to her side, desperately trying to shake her awake. It was futile. Sophia was gone. Richard's frantic call to 911 brought the police and paramedics rushing to the scene. They confirmed what Richard already knew. Sophia Carson was dead. The initial investigation began, with officers combing through the house for clues. Richard was in shock, barely able to process the questions thrown his way. Detective Sarah McMillan, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for her keen instincts, took charge of the case. She quickly established that there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Sophia knew her attacker. As the investigation progressed, Richard's alibi was scrutinized. His fishing buddies corroborated his story, placing him miles away at the time of Sophia's death. The community was in disbelief. The Carsons had always appeared to be the perfect couple, deeply in love and committed to their family. But as the days passed, whispers of Richard's suspected infidelity began to surface. Sophia's best friend Laura mentioned that Sophia had confided in her about her fears that Richard was cheating. This revelation cast a shadow of suspicion over Richard, despite his solid alibi. The media quickly picked up the story, painting a picture of a troubled marriage and a potential crime of passion. The pressure mounted on the police to solve the case, but with Richard's airtight alibi, they were at a loss. It was then that Sophia's sister, Megan, decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator, Jake Thompson, to dig deeper into Sophia's suspicions and uncover the truth behind her sister's death. Richard and Sophia Carson's love story began in high school. They were the quintessential sweethearts, inseparable and deeply in love. After graduation, they went to college together, got married, and started a family. Their life seemed like a fairy tale, filled with love, success, and 2 beautiful children. Richard's career as an accountant flourished, and Sophia found her calling as a teacher. They were well liked in their community, active in local events, and always seen together at neighborhood gatherings. But beneath the surface, Sophia harbored growing suspicions about her husband's fidelity. It started with small things: late nights at the office, unexplained phone calls, and Richard's increasing emotional distance. Sophia confided in her best friend Laura, sharing her fears and doubts. Laura advised her to confront Richard, but Sophia was hesitant. She didn't want to believe that the man she loved could betray her. As months turned into years, Sophia's suspicions deepened. She found herself checking Richard's phone when he wasn't looking, scrutinizing his behavior for any signs of infidelity. Her anxiety grew, casting a shadow over her once happy marriage. She often asked Laura if she was overreacting, but Laura could see the toll it was taking on her friend. One evening, Sophia found a lipstick stain on Richard's collar. It was the final straw. She confronted him, demanding the truth. Richard denied any wrongdoing, insisting that it was a misunderstanding. He claimed he was loyal and devoted, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Their arguments became more frequent and intense. Sophia felt trapped in a web of doubt and mistrust, while Richard grew increasingly frustrated with her accusations. In her darkest moments, Sophia wondered if she was losing her mind. She contemplated hiring a private investigator, but feared what she might discover. Instead, she continued to confide in Laura, who remained her steadfast support. Laura, concerned for her friend's well-being, suggested they document everything. Sophia began keeping a journal, recording every suspicious incident, every fight, and every moment of doubt. She hoped that if the truth ever came out, she would have the evidence to confront Richard once and for all. Sophia's sister, Megan, was also aware of the tensions in the Carson household. She had always been close to Sophia and noticed the changes in her demeanor. Megan urged Sophia to take action, but Sophia remained paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. As the months passed, Sophia's suspicions became an all-consuming obsession. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that her husband was leading a double life. It was this unrelenting doubt that ultimately led Megan to hire Jake Thompson, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for her sister. Detective Sarah McMillan's team worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to Sophia Carson's death. They interviewed family, friends, and neighbors, trying to build a profile of Sophia's life and the possible motives for her murder. Richard's cooperation was noted, but his solid alibi kept him out of immediate suspicion. Megan, desperate for answers, turned to private investigator Jake Thompson. Jake was known for his tenacity and skill in uncovering hidden truths. With a career spanning over 2 decades, he had a reputation for solving the most challenging cases. When Megan approached him, he listened intently to her concerns about Richard's infidelity and Sophia's suspicions. Jake agreed to take the case, starting with a thorough review of Sophia's journal. The detailed entries painted a picture of a woman tormented by doubt and fear. Sophia's descriptions of Richard's behavior and her growing anxiety provided Jake with valuable insights into the possible cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage. Jake's first step was to delve into Richard's background. He conducted surveillance, followed Richard to work, and monitored his interactions. Richard appeared to be a devoted father and professional, but Jake knew better than to take things at face value. Interviews with Sophia's friends and colleagues revealed a woman who was deeply loved and respected. They spoke of her kindness, dedication to her students, and the love she had for her family. But they also mentioned the changes they had seen in her over the past few years. Laura, Sophia's best friend, was a crucial source of information. She shared the details of Sophia's fears and the confrontations she had with Richard. Laura also mentioned a woman named Carla Mason, a former colleague of Richard's who had once been very close to him. Sophia had always been wary of Carla, suspecting her of having an affair with Richard. Jake's investigation led him to Carla Mason. He dug into her background, uncovering a series of troubling details. Carla had a history of unstable relationships and a reputation for being manipulative. She had left the company where she worked with Richard under mysterious circumstances, and Jake's instincts told him there was more to the story. As Jake pieced together the puzzle, he began to see a pattern. Carla's presence in Richard's life, Sophia's escalating suspicions, and the sudden violent end to Sophia's life were all connected. He knew he was onto something significant, but he needed concrete evidence to prove Carla's involvement. Jake intensified his surveillance on Carla, watching her every move. He interviewed her acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by jealousy and obsession. It became clear that Carla harbored a deep resentment towards Sophia, viewing her as the obstacle to her happiness with Richard. With the pieces falling into place, Jake prepared to confront Carla, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for Sophia Carson. Jake Thompson was no stranger to the darker side of human nature. With years of experience as a private investigator, he had seen it all: infidelity, fraud, even murder. But the Carson case had a complexity that intrigued him. As he delved deeper, the tangled web of deceit and betrayal began to unravel. Richard Carson, on the surface, was a model husband and father, but Jake's investigation revealed another side to him. Richard had indeed been unfaithful, and his affair with Carla Mason was more than a fleeting indiscretion. Carla Mason was a striking woman in her early 30s, with a magnetic presence that drew people to her. She had met Richard when they both worked at the same accounting firm. Their affair began innocently enough, with shared lunches and late-night conversations, but it quickly escalated into a passionate and clandestine relationship. Jake's surveillance provided him with the evidence he needed. He captured photos of Richard and Carla meeting in secret, their intimate moments betraying the depth of their connection. But it wasn't just the affair that caught Jake's attention. It was Carla's behavior. She was possessive, obsessive, and clearly driven by a desire to replace Sophia in Richard's life. Jake's investigation into Carla's past revealed a troubled history. She had grown up in a dysfunctional family, with a mother who was emotionally distant and a series of abusive relationships.
These experiences had left Carla with deep emotional scars and a desperate need for validation and love. When she met Richard, she saw him as her ticket to a better life, a chance to escape her past and find happiness. But Carla's obsession with Richard took a dark turn when she realized he would never leave Sophia. Despite Richard's promises and assurances, he remained with his wife, further fueling Carla's resentment. She began to see Sophia as the obstacle standing between her and the life she desired. Her jealousy grew, and with it, a dangerous resolve. Jake's breakthrough came when he discovered a series of emails between Carla and Richard. In them, Carla expressed her frustration and anger, accusing Richard of leading her on and demanding that he leave Sophia. Richard's responses were apologetic, but non-committal, indicating his reluctance to abandon his family. One email in particular stood out. It was sent a week before Sophia's death. Carla had written a long emotional message, threatening to expose their affair if Richard didn't take action. She hinted at a plan to remove Sophia from the picture, a chilling foreshadowing of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Armed with this evidence, Jake intensified his efforts to link Carla directly to the crime. He interviewed her former colleagues and friends, uncovering a pattern of manipulative and unstable behavior. They described Carla as someone who would go to great lengths to get what she wanted, often using deceit and emotional manipulation to achieve her goals. One colleague in particular provided a crucial piece of information. He recalled a conversation with Carla where she had fantasized about a life with Richard, free from the constraints of his marriage. She had spoken with a chilling detachment about the possibility of Sophia disappearing, a comment that now took on a sinister significance. Jake knew he was close. He gathered all the evidence he had collected and prepared to confront Carla. He needed her to confess, to break under the weight of the truth. Carla Mason's affair with Richard Carson had started with innocent flirtation and grown into a full-blown obsession. She had fallen hard for Richard, seeing him as her escape from a life of loneliness and pain. But as their relationship deepened, so did her jealousy and desire to replace Sophia Carson. The affair began 3 years prior at an office holiday party. Richard, charming and attentive, had noticed Carla sitting alone and struck up a conversation. They found common ground in their love for their work and shared frustrations about their personal lives. Richard confided in Carla about his strained marriage, while Carla shared her dreams of finding true love. Their connection was instant and electric. Soon they were meeting for lunches, then dinners, and finally secret rendezvous at hotels. Richard was careful to keep their affair hidden, but Carla's feelings for him grew stronger with each passing day. She fantasized about a future where they could be together openly, free from the constraints of his marriage. Carla's fantasies, however, were marred by the reality of Sophia's existence. Every time Richard went home to his wife, Carla's resentment festered. She started to view Sophia as the obstacle to her happiness, the barrier standing between her and the life she wanted with Richard. Carla's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would call Richard at all hours, demanding to know where he was and who he was with. She became possessive, monitoring his social media and showing up unannounced at his office. Richard, initially flattered by her attention, began to feel trapped by her neediness. The breaking point came when Carla discovered that Richard had lied to her about spending a weekend with Sophia. Enraged, she confronted him, demanding that he choose between her and his wife. Richard, caught off guard by her intensity, tried to calm her down. He promised he would leave Sophia, but deep down he knew he couldn't follow through. As Carla's obsession grew, so did her hatred for Sophia. She started to stalk her, learning her routines and habits. Carla would drive by the Carson house late at night, watching from the shadows as Sophia went about her life. Her anger boiled over as she saw the life she wanted being lived by another woman. Carla's plan to remove Sophia took shape over several months. She began to fantasize about ways to eliminate her rival, her thoughts growing darker and more dangerous. The email she sent to Richard, threatening to expose their affair, was a desperate attempt to force his hand. But when he failed to act, Carla decided to take matters into her own hands. On the night of the murder, Carla waited until she knew Richard was away on his fishing trip. She had meticulously planned every detail, from disabling the security cameras to ensuring she left no trace of her presence. She broke into the Carson house using a spare key Richard had given her, moving silently through the darkened rooms. Sophia was asleep when Carla entered the bedroom. The sight of her rival,
peaceful and unaware, fueled Carla's rage. She approached the bed, a knife clutched tightly in her hand. Sophia woke up just as Carla lunged, but it was too late. The attack was swift and brutal, driven by years of pent-up anger and resentment. After the deed was done, Carla stood over Sophia's lifeless body, a mixture of triumph and horror washing over her. She had done it. She had removed the obstacle to her happiness. But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of her actions set in. She quickly wiped down the surfaces she had touched, making sure to leave no evidence behind. Then she slipped out of the house and disappeared into the night. Carla believed she had committed the perfect crime, but Jake Thompson's investigation unraveled her carefully constructed alibi. His surveillance and interviews revealed the depth of her obsession and the lengths she had gone to in order to be with Richard. The evidence he gathered painted a chilling picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to get what she wanted. As Jake prepared to confront Carla, he knew that her fragile psyche would be her undoing. The weight of her guilt, combined with the mountain of evidence against her, would be too much for her to bear. It was only a matter of time before she broke under the pressure and confessed to her heinous crime. Jake Thompson meticulously gathered the evidence needed to build an airtight case against Carla Mason. He knew that to secure a conviction, every detail had to be scrutinized and every lead followed. His investigation had revealed Carla's obsessive behavior, her deep-seated resentment towards Sophia, and the lengths she went to in order to be with Richard. Now it was time to piece it all together. Jake's first task was to consolidate the surveillance footage and photographs he had taken of Carla and Richard. The images clearly showed their intimate relationship, disproving any claims that Carla might make about their affair being over. These visual proofs were crucial in establishing Carla's motive. Next, Jake focused on the emails between Carla and Richard. The threatening messages Carla had sent, demanding that Richard leave Sophia or face the consequences, were damning evidence of her intent. Jake printed out the emails, highlighting the passages where Carla hinted at drastic measures if she didn't get her way. Jake also gathered testimonies from Carla's former colleagues and acquaintances. One witness, a close friend of Carla's, reluctantly shared a conversation they had just days before Sophia's murder. Carla had expressed a disturbing desire for Sophia to disappear, even making offhand remarks about how easy it would be to make it happen. This testimony painted a clear picture of Carla's premeditation. The most crucial piece of evidence, however, came from the crime scene itself. Jake had worked closely with Detective Sarah McMillan, sharing his findings and collaborating on the investigation. Forensic analysis revealed traces of Carla's DNA on the knife used to kill Sophia, as well as on the bedroom door handle. Despite her efforts to clean up, Carla had made critical mistakes that tied her directly to the murder. Jake and Sarah also discovered a partial fingerprint on the windowsill where Carla had entered the house. While it wasn't a complete match, it added to the mounting evidence against her. Jake knew that these physical proofs, combined with the digital and testimonial evidence, created a compelling case. With everything in place, Jake turned his attention to Carla's acquaintances. He interviewed neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by desperation and jealousy. One neighbor recalled seeing Carla's car parked near the Carson house on several occasions, further corroborating her stalking behavior. The final piece of the puzzle came from a surprising source. Richard, racked with guilt and realizing the extent of Carla's obsession, agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. He provided additional emails and messages from Carla, as well as his own account of their relationship. Richard's testimony was crucial in establishing the timeline and confirming Carla's motives. Jake presented his findings to Detective McMillan, who was impressed by the thoroughness of the investigation. Together, they compiled a detailed report outlining Carla's motives, actions, and the overwhelming evidence against her. The case was ready to go to trial. Carla was arrested at her apartment, her shocked expression revealing her belief that she had gotten away with murder. As the police led her away in handcuffs, Jake felt a sense of satisfaction. He had uncovered the truth and ensured that justice would be served for Sophia Carson. The legal proceedings were swift. Carla's defense tried to argue that she had been framed, but the evidence was irrefutable. The emails, the forensic evidence, and the testimonies painted a clear picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to achieve her desires. In the end, Carla was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard's involvement, though not criminal, left a stain on his reputation and devastated his family. The Carson children, Anna and Tyler, faced a future without their mother and with a father whose actions had indirectly led to her death. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, those left behind struggled to find a sense of normalcy. The Carson family's once bright future was now overshadowed by loss and betrayal. Sophia's absence was a constant presence in their lives, a void that could never be filled. Megan, Sophia's sister, took on the role of guardian for Anna and Tyler. She moved into the Carson home, providing stability and support for the children. Megan's bond with her niece and nephew deepened as they navigated their shared grief. Together, they honored Sophia's memory, finding comfort in the love she had given them. Laura, Sophia's best friend, also played a crucial role in helping the family heal. She organized memorial events, celebrating Sophia's life and the impact she had on those around her. The community rallied together, offering support and love to the Carson children, ensuring they knew they were not alone. Richard, burdened by guilt and remorse, sought therapy to confront his actions and the consequences they had wrought. He knew he could never undo the pain he had caused, but he hoped to find a path to redemption. Richard's journey was one of self-reflection and accountability, a long and difficult process of coming to terms with his past. As the years passed, Anna and Tyler grew up, carrying with them the lessons of their mother's life and the strength of their Aunt Megan's love. They pursued their dreams, determined to honor Sophia's memory through their actions and achievements. The scars of their past remained, but they found ways to move forward, holding on to the positive memories of their family. The Carson case, with all its twists and tragedies, became a beacon of resilience for the community. It reminded them of the fragility of life and the strength that could be found in unity and support.